In this video, I'll be explaining all GTA games in chronological order. My goal is to create a clear timeline connecting all the games to make it easier for you to understand the entire story of this remarkable franchise. Throughout the video, there will be a timeline animation at the bottom of the screen, which should help you follow along and understand when certain games take place. There are a total of 11 GTA games, plus a few DLCs we'll cover in this video, and believe it or not, the first game actually takes place all the way back in 1961. GTA London 1961 is an expansion for the original GTA 1. However, canonically, it takes place before the main game, so we'll cover it first. Since there are a total of 8 playable protagonists, it's up to the player to decide who to choose and follow along the story with. Regardless of which one you pick, the story remains the same. The plot follows a gangster's exploits through London City in 1961 at the behest of a criminal named Harold Cartwright, who's issuing orders given to him by the Crisp twins. The first mission Harold assigns the player is to plant a bomb at a couple of rival greaser gangs' hideouts. Upon reaching the first hideout, the protagonist gets out of the car and successfully bombs the place before collecting the other bombs hidden away in West Brixton. With more bombs in hand, the player makes their way toward the second hideout and effectively wipes out both rival gang hideouts for Harold. This event sparks up a turf war between the two greaser gangs, who blame each other for the bombings. The protagonist's next task is to aggravate the situation and make sure both sides start firing at each other in order for Harold to divide and conquer their forces. The gangs meet face to face in an alleyway at Northwest Brixton. Upon your arrival, the voice on the radio informs the player that their cover has been blown and that both of the gang leaders are aware of the fact that they've been set up. He then proceeds to ask you to talk to Jack. Jack informs the player that Harold wants bloodshed, and you're going to be the one responsible for making it happen. Jack tells you about equipping an armored vest in case you need it before you start mowing down everyone else in the alleyway. Unfortunately, some of the gangsters manage to avoid the encounter, and now you'll have to track them down and kill them. Once you're done eliminating all of the witnesses, the voice on the radio tells you Harold will be pleased with your efforts. You're told there are more jobs lined up for you, and all of the instructions will be delivered through the same payphones you visited before. The next task assigned to you is to protect a prominent gambler named Mr. Cockenballs, who's visiting London. After picking him up, the voice on the radio tells you to drive him to one of Harold's hideouts. Once you park the car inside, you're told to go outside and meet Curly. Unfortunately, by the time you talk to Curly, he tells you that Mr. Cockenballs has been abducted by a rival gang and that you better hurry and get him back safe and sound. Once you take out the schmuck who abducted Mr. Cockenballs, your next objective is to carry a payload of TNT over to the gang who asked for ransom. Harold sets up a cab for you to drive into the rival gang's hideouts fitted with explosives. Once you bomb the place, you get cornered by an army of gang members pointing their weapons at you. With some super armor, you effectively take out the trash by killing the rest of the goons and go back to Mr. Cockenballs to pick him up from the East Mile End. The mission ends once you drop him back at the hotel. This puts you in Harold's good books since he's very satisfied with your services. Next, you need to crash a pool party being held by a greaser gang boss named Gene White. Once you grab the cab and arrive there, the voice lets you know that Gene escaped the premises. Now you're tasked with killing him and rounding up the other guests at his party. Once you find Gene running naked around the city and effectively run him over, you drive his girls back to Harold's hideouts. Soon after, the voice on the radio informs you that you and Harold were secretly filmed while having fun with the girls, and that now it's your problem to resolve the matter. You are told to go meet Bongo, and he'll tell you how to handle the situation. At Northeast City, Bongo tells you to blow up a couple of vans that are carrying your tapes. You do as you're told and help Harold save his reputation. Your last job from the payphone is to go out and murder a race car driver named Poundage Fern. He's apparently heavily guarded by his goons, so you have to take them out first to get to him. Unfortunately, they escape before you arrive, so the voice on the radio tells you about a special fast car you can use to get to your next location faster. After committing a massacre and annihilating Fern's crew, you are ordered to steal one of his sports cars and track Fern down. Once you find Fern, you give chase and catch up to his sports car in order to put an end to his misery. Now, with Fern out of the picture, the voice lets you know know Harold wants you to pretend to be Fern and take his place in the race. You race to North Mile End and win the championship trophy for Harold and are asked to bring it back to him. Soon after, Harold instructs you to steal a jug swinger sports car for his mom. However, unbeknownst to both Harold and the protagonist, the car actually belongs to a secret agent named Endeavor Chambers, who works for the British government. Assuming the protagonist is Chambers, the government tasks you with the objective of stealing a truck full of potatoes that they deemed rather suspicious, and bringing it back to them for an analysis of its contents. Once you deliver the payload, the government determines that it's a ruse for transporting bombs throughout the city, and that a group named Nemesis is responsible for this. Still thinking that you're Chambers, they ask you to pay someone named Grandpa a visit and wait for further instructions. Upon your arrival, you're told to plant the explosives in the old man's wheelchair and head over to Nemesis' hideout, causing a distraction while Grandpa plays his part. You get in a TV van parked outside and control Grandpa's wheelchair so that he drives into the hideouts and kamikazes Nemesis forces. After foiling the terrorist plot, the government tells you Nemesis' group has started to vacate the country. Later, after stealing a TV van parked between some buildings, you're tasked with eliminating a geezer who's blackmailing Harold. You quickly beat up the old man in front of the London Tower and head for Buckingham Palace. There, you find that man's son and murder him without remorse to grab the evidence he had on Harold. After delivering the evidence back to him, the game ends, and Harold congratulates you for all of your efforts so far. Eventually, the protagonist gets sent to the United States to do a job for the Crisp twins in Vice City. GTA London, 1969. It's now 1969, 8 years after the previous game, and the protagonist is finally back from the US and ready to do a few jobs here and there for his old pals, the Crisp twins. The first mission they assign you involves stealing a mod scooter from central Chelsea and driving it down to Harold's place. Your next task is to go meet Harold, who's standing outside the building. During the meeting, Harold explains how you're going to do as told, or else. Soon enough, you get contacted by the mob, and they tell you that a rival syndicate called the Battersea Mods is starting to agitate the Crisp twins. You soon learn that the drugs Harold planned to use to lure in the mods were stolen by a person named Chalky. Now it's your job to track him down in order to successfully carry out the mission. So you grab a sick ride and head over to Soho to look for Chalky and make him cough up the whereabouts of the drugs. Turns out, Chalky just dropped it in a bush while he was panicking. Even though you find the stash tucked away, Harold's tired of Chalky's antics and would rather have him killed. As if that wasn't enough, you are also instructed to clean up things in Chalky's pub. What better way to do that than planting a bomb right at the pub's door and running away? With the drugs retrieved, phase 2 of bringing the mods down now involves the protagonist having a meeting with the gang in West Chelsea. Unfortunately, you are directed to the wrong address, and there aren't any mods in the building. After shaking down the guy who's guarding the building, you find out that the mods are on the roof waiting for their stash to arrive. Instead of a drop, all they receive is a rude awakening as you wipe out their entire crew. At this point, Harold trusts you quite a fair bit and chooses you to deal with the Knowles brothers, who've just taxed the Crisp twins a hefty fine of $5,000 plus a bunch of their drugs. The voice on the radio orders you to execute the Knowles brothers and escape to Harold's sister, Beryl's place, to lie low and wait the heat out. Eventually, you are told of a job at the power station that's being held up by a fellow named Midnight who's got cold feet. The protagonist discovers Midnight's location and jacks his car, only to park it outside the power station. The bomb explodes and the city's lights go off. Taking advantage of the city's lack of power, the Crisp twins goons pull off multiple successful bank heists, and you're their getaway ride. After doing a couple more jobs for the twins, you soon meet with Harold and find out about his plan to take over the Crisp twins' empire. Meanwhile, the government somehow mistakes you again for a spy, like in a previous game, and you are tasked with taking down Han Nemesis before his group detonates bombs within the city. Resolving the matter leads to the government informing the protagonists that the Queen of England was rather proud of their efforts to keep the country safe. Not long after this, the Crisp twins demand a meeting with the protagonist. During the meeting, the protagonist gets threatened by the twins and is asked to make sure he stamps out any opposition to their authority. They begin to issue orders directly directly to the protagonist and have him perform a few personal favors before raising the bar and asking the protagonist to eradicate Harold and his gang. After doing so, the Crisp twins discover that Harold was innocent all along, but brush it off as nothing. Afterward, the protagonist comes across a chap named Terry Dorkins, who informs him that the twins are fed up with his associate's gang and wants him dead. The associate, Lenny Smith, and his crew are almost completely wiped out by the protagonist, before Lenny informs you that the Crisp twins are planning to get rid of you too, since they're paranoid from using their own drugs. With the Crisp twins listening in on the entire conversation, the protagonist kills Lenny before leaving the scene of the crime. You learn that the Crisp twins are planning to run away from London and need to be eliminated before they do. The protagonist gives chase and successfully blows up their car with them inside it. Unfortunately, the twins survive the encounter, but admit defeat as they continue to leave town and leave their criminal empire to the protagonist. Now, before we continue any further, I just want to quickly explain something. Although I'll be explaining the entire GTA timeline in this video, an important thing to mention at this point is that GTA games are actually split into 3 different universes: 2D universe, 3D universe, and HD universe. This basically means that certain games follow their own timeline and are not connected to other games. It's just something to keep in mind in order to understand the story better. GTA Vice City Stories, 1984. It's 1984 in Vice City now, and a veteran steps out of an army vehicle ready to report back to his old chief commanding officer at Fort Baxter Air Base. The veteran in question is Corporal Victor Vance, also known as Vic, who joined the army in order to scrounge up some money for his family. After a brief meeting with his commanding officer, Sergeant Jerry Martinez, Vic is tasked with picking up a package for Jerry. He leaves the base with a pager in hand and arrives at the airport. There, Vic meets an interesting man who takes him out to his boat. Soon enough, the duo gets ambushed by a group of men on boats seeking to steal Jerry's package. After having their boat blown up on them, Vic abandons ship and eventually makes his way back to the barracks to report back to Jerry. During their meeting, Vic makes it clear that he's uncomfortable with dealing with drugs that are openly laid out on Jerry's table, so Jerry asks him to retrieve some money instead. Even though the plan was meant to be simple, when Vic went to the docks to meet Phil and pick up the money, Phil informed him that the money is hidden inside his old place, which is currently under control of Cholo's gang. Vic eventually manages to get in and retrieve the money. Upon his return, Jerry sends Vic out to pick up a girl named Mary for him and asks him to visit Phil for a little present waiting for him. So Vic meets Phil and finds out that he's the owner of a brand new, untraceable, stolen vehicle. In his sweet new ride, Vic goes around town looking for Mary and eventually breaks into a party to get her. After dealing with some of the thugs who hired her, Vic drives Mary back to the base, only to find out Jerry betrayed him and pinned the drugs on him. The military dishonorably discharges Vic for his behavior and promptly kicks him out of the base. With nowhere else to go, Vic moves into Phil's old safe house and starts to do odd jobs for him. Most of these jobs involve Vic tussling with the Cholos gang. After some time, Vic is confronted by Jerry, and although Vic is mad about everything Jerry has done, he is forced to work with him again as he has no other choice. Both Phil and Vic are assigned a task to secure some guns for Jerry, and together with some friends, the duo managed to steal a military truck and bring it back to Phil's safe house. Eventually, in search of more work, Vic gets sent to one of Phil's associates named Marty, who lives in a trailer house with his wife and daughter. Vic and Marty hit the town and handle some racketeering business, with Vic realizing that he's slowly slipping away into a life of crime. Marty pays Vic for a few more repo gigs before Vic decides to pay Phil a visit again. To his surprise, Vic winds up interrupting a meeting between Jerry and Phil and gets roped into doing a job for Jerry yet again. Unbeknownst to them, Jerry sent both Phil and Vic into an ambush, and both men almost lost their lives. After this betrayal, the boys decide enough is enough and that Jerry isn't someone they can trust anymore. They decide to lie low for the time being in order to avoid any heat. During all of this, Vic gets a call from Marty's wife, Louise, and decides to meet her at a hotel she's staying in. The pair start to bond, and Vic offers to take Louise out for a quad bike race at the trailer park. Things go well, but eventually Louise calls Vic over again. Out of the goodness of his heart, Vic offers to help Louise get her baby's stuff back from Marty's house at the trailer park, only to find a group of men looking to beat them up. After their little excursion, Vic drops her back home, but eventually gets into even more trouble. During his routine visits to Louise's place, Vic comes across her sister Mary Jo, who tells him Louise was abducted by Marty. Vic rushes to Marty's trailer and narrowly avoids getting run over by him before getting ambushed by some of his goons. After dealing with them, Vic eventually catches up to Marty and murders him before getting sent to a safe house to lie low for a while. After Marty's death, to fill the power vacuum and get some cash in their pockets, Louise asks Vic to take over Marty's entire operation. Under her direction, Vic confronts Marty's employees and eventually assumes control of the compound. Things go well for Vic for some time, but soon after his takeover, Vic's brother, Lance Vance, decides to pay him a visit. Despite their differences in the past, Vic decides to bury the hatchet and trust Lance. Their peaceful reunion goes well until some cholos pull up in front of them. Vic and Lance make a hasty getaway in their car and get to bond over their near-death experience. Soon after, with Louise's help, Vic kills off Marty's cousin for lighting his strip club on fire, and also helps Louise take care of a welfare officer who was threatening to take her baby away. Now that things have started heating up for Vic, he decides to recruit one of Marty's men, Umberto Robina, in order to carry out his day-to-day operations as a crime boss. Vic proves himself to Umberto and delivers some packages for him in order to gain his trust. Umberto and Vic decide to partner up soon after. By now, the cholos have been bothering Vic for far too long, and it's time for him and Umberto's crew to pay them a visit, steal some of their guns, and blow up the place while they're at it. After successfully eradicating their opposition, Vic turns his attention towards his brother, Lance. After walking in on Lance taking a phone call, Vic gets asked to assist him with a favor they have to do for a man named Forbes. The brothers visit a burger joint to get information from Forbes on their task. While they're in there, some thugs decide to rob the place, and the brothers have to fight their way out. Once they get rid of the robbers, the police arrive outside and assume they're the robbers. So they have to get rid of the heat and eventually arrive at the compound to get a car back for their new employer. After a job well done, Forbes decides to pay the duo a visit and convinces Vic to act as a decoy for the cops. So his plan to steal drugs from another party works out without a hitch. Things go smoothly, but after meeting up with Forbes again to settle things, the brothers learn that he's actually an undercover cop. Forbes tries to make his escape, but they eventually catch and abduct him. They take Forbes to an undisclosed safe house to extort information out of him. During one of their interrogations, Forbes lets the duo know of a drug dealer with a big stash and no bodyguards. This sounds enticing to Lance, so he decides to look into the matter and unfortunately gets himself caught and brought on board a ship. Vic boards the ship and saves Lance, and together both of them offload the drugs into a car and drive it back to their safe house. At this point, it's been days since they kidnapped Forbes, and Lance even went as far as to break into Forbes' home for some information regarding any big drug deals going on around the city. Eventually, Forbes manages to escape, but is quickly caught and killed by the brothers. Despite everything, Lance is still obsessed with finding out more details regarding the big shipment of drugs coming into the city, which he learned about in Forbes' files. After some digging, the pair find out that the big shipment of drugs belongs to Jerry, Vic's former superior. Even though Vic initially wanted to cut ties with Lance over the drug situation, in the end, he decides to help him as a way to get back at Jerry. The pair ambushes Jerry's men at the docks and attempts to steal the drugs before Jerry himself swoops in on them in a helicopter. Despite everything, Vic successfully steals the shipment and stores it away at his compound. While gloating about it to Jerry over the phone, he gets a rude awakening as Jerry informs him that the shipment wasn't his. The drugs actually belonged to the Mendez brothers, who operate a very powerful cartel in Vice City. The Lance brothers are in big trouble now, and even Jerry is leaving the state for his own safety. To make matters worse, the brothers soon realize their mother stole the drugs they stored at home and skipped town. However, that's not even the worst part, as now the Mendez brothers begin to target Vic's businesses. With no other choice left, Vic and Vance have to organize a meeting with the Mendez brothers before things get completely out of hand. Mendez and Diego gladly oblige and invite the Lance brothers over for a chat. They ask them to partner up and locate the individuals responsible for ripping them off. Lance takes the chance to accuse Jerry, and at the behest of the Mendez brothers, goes out to find proof. Lance concocts a plan to frame Jerry and get incriminating photographs of him with some federal agents before he leaves the state. Eventually, the plan is to paint Jerry as an undercover cop, like Forbes was. Vic gets sent out to take some photographs and collect an ID belonging to the late Forbes. After that, he meets up with Lance, and together they go on to forge fake ID papers that make it look like Jerry was an undercover DEA agent all along. They present the evidence to the Mendez brothers and eventually get the heat off their backs. Although Vic's empire is now thriving again, it's still under the umbrella of influence the Mendez brothers hold. During a meeting with one of them, Vic gets a job that involves setting up his own drug shop in Vice City. Although he doesn't want to do it, Vic obliges, realizing that he has no say in the matter. As the Mendez's lapdog, Vic's forced to carry out all sorts of favors for them, like silencing people who disagree with them and stealing drugs from law enforcement. Shortly after handling all of that, Spitz gives Vic a job. Vic heads over to a peculiar individual's place, someone named Rennie Wasselmeyer. As it usually goes in GTA games, Vic winds up doing a few odd jobs for Rennie, and in exchange he gets access to numerous contacts who are looking to buy the Vance brothers' drugs. Instead of prospective buyers, Rennie winds up giving Vic access to some very important people like Phil Collins and Gonzalez. After this, Vic and Lance meet up. Lance lets Vic know the Mendez brothers are still on edge with him and that a gang of bikers stole some of their blow. Boarding a helicopter, the brothers deal with the bikers before their vehicle explodes and both of them jump out mid-air. Lance then escapes the premises using a bike he found on the property. Following this interaction, Vic decides to confront Lance over the supposedly missing drugs, only to find his brother partaking in the merchandise. Not only that, things between Louise and Vic go sour because the former spends her free time getting high with Lance now. After Vic's confrontation, in a fit of rage, Lance goes out to dump all the drugs around town while riding a helicopter with Vic chasing him and recovering each package. Thanks to Lance, it's not long before Vic is forced into a meeting with a drug lord named Ricardo Diaz in order to secure some funds and access to more drugs for the Mendez brothers. Vic's first job from Diaz is to retrieve his drugs from Gonzalez's stronghold. After stealing a speedboat filled with Diaz's product, the Vance brothers drive it back to the compound. Once there, Diaz makes a deal with the DEA to hand over 200 kilos of the drugs he made Vic stole for some heavy ammunition. The deal goes about as well as you would expect, with Gonzalez ambushing them, but everything resolves smoothly in the end. Having outlived their usefulness to the Mendez family, the Vance brothers barely avoid getting executed by a firing squad out of sheer luck. At this point, Lance has had enough of being pushed around by the Mendez brothers and thus calls in a few favors from old friends. Phil, Umberto, Lance, and Vic go on to strategically target the Mendez's operations. On a routine visit to Louise at the hospital, Vic receives word from Lance that he needs to be rescued by a helicopter. Stealing one from the hospital, Vic and Louise rush to save Lance from the roof of a burning building. According to Lance, Jerry set them up. Things go smoothly for a bit as Vic helps Rennie escape the Mendez brothers and even saves Phil from an assassination attempt. However, the good times end when the Vance brothers find out that Louise got abducted by Mendez's men. In an all-out raid on the Mendez compound, Vic successfully kills Armando Mendez, only to witness Louise die in his arms. Fueled by rage, Vic agrees to Diaz's plan to steal an attack helicopter from the military and use it to kill Diego Mendez from the air. The chopper blows up on the roof of Mendez's building, and Vic single-handedly starts clearing out each floor of Mendez's men before Jerry makes a surprise comeback. Diego, Jerry, and Vic start shooting at each other on the roof of the building, but by the end of it all, Vic is the only one left standing. After making his escape from the building with Lance, this part of the Vance brothers' story concludes. But don't worry, this isn't the last time you'll hear about them. GTA Vice City, 1986. Vice City's story is fairly simple. The first few cutscenes get you acquainted with the anti-hero you'll be playing as, Tommy Vercetti, and gives you some context on why he's in the city. He spent 15 years behind bars for brutally murdering 11 people in Harwood, and is now known as Tommy the Harwood Butcher. In 1986, Tommy is released from prison after Sonny, his old employer, pulled some strings and managed to get him out. Sonny and his Forelli crime family want to expand their network down south in Vice City, so they send Tommy there to make sure their drug deal with the Vance brothers goes exactly as planned. Unfortunately, Tommy walks into an ambush by some mysterious men in black and winds up being the only man who survives the encounter. The Forelli's lawyer, Ken Rosenberg, helped Tommy get away just in the nick of time. Prior to this event, we see the heads of the Forelli family discuss whether they would need to dispose of Tommy just in case. This is an important plotline that will come to make more sense later on in the story. As if almost dying wasn't bad enough for Tommy, now he's responsible for making sure his boss, Sonny Forelli, gets the money he lost during that ambush. Feeling the fire light up under his feet, Tommy desperately looks for answers in order to pay his boss back. His first lead is a colonel named Juan Cortez, the person who organized the deal initially. Tommy's job now is to crash the colonel's yacht party and get a sleek new outfit to fit in with the rest of Vice City's biggest players. After some deliberation at the party, the colonel's daughter, Mercedes, gets Tommy acquainted with the rest of the guests, including the biggest coke dealer in the city, Ricardo Diaz. Tommy and Mercedes hit it off rather fast, but the party winds up being a dead end for the investigation. Soon after, Ken shares the whereabouts of a prominent music producer, Kent Paul, who might know where the drugs wound up being stashed. Tommy decides to pay him a visit, and after shaking him down, Paul tells him about a chef who seemed rather happy lately. Tommy gives the chef a beatdown before coming across Lance Vance. After their little chat, a swarm of chefs swing by and threaten to grind the duo to a pulp. Together, they escape from the premises, and Lance winds up offering Tommy a chance to partner up together and solve the mystery of the missing drugs. After a couple of side jobs, Tommy gets a call from Colonel, who wants to meet him again in order to share some details regarding the ambush. At the yacht, Cortez discloses how his right-hand man Gonzalez was responsible for leaking the information regarding the deal. To keep his mouth shut for good, Tommy's tasked with eliminating Gonzalez with a chainsaw. After this little skirmish, the colonel makes Tommy oversee a business transaction between Ricardo Diaz and a rival as a gun for hire. While he's on the job, Lance eventually catches up with Tommy again, and both of them decide to stake out and observe Diaz's deal. Tommy winds up saving Diaz's money from some rather unsavory Haitian gang members who wanted a slice of the action, and as a result, finds himself working for Diaz. Diaz also employed Lance, assuming that he's someone named Quentin who knows how to fly airborne vehicles. Like Tommy, Lance wants to find out what happened to his brother and the drugs, and tells Tommy how he suspects Diaz is behind it. That's why he decided to get closer to Diaz, which is exactly what Tommy is trying to do as well. After running a few errands for Diaz, Lance and Tommy start to form a budding relationship. Unfortunately, soon after, Lance gets tired of doing grunt work for Diaz and decides to jump him. Tommy's old friend Kent Paul lets him know what happened, and Tommy rushes towards the city's junkyard to save Lance. After mowing down people to get inside, he finds Lance getting tortured and decides to free him. Dropping Lance off at the hospital, Tommy helps the colonel leave town on his ship with the French tailing them. The colonel asks Tommy to keep an eye out for his daughter, and soon after, Tommy finds out he has a target on his back. After recovering from his injuries, Lance meets up with Tommy again and brings heavy ammunition with him so they can finally take out Diaz once and for all. The duo successfully pull off a raid of Diaz's compound and murder Diaz in his own mansion. Tommy takes over Diaz's operations and even shoots up a mall to assert his dominance over the rest of Vice City. Now that the city's eating out of his palms, Tommy's grown into a cutthroat mob boss again and eventually starts to alienate Lance with his attitude. Aiming to keep the peace, Tommy tries his best to calm Lance down and reassures him over and over again. Soon after purchasing a printing house, an old man tells Tommy they can start counterfeiting money once they get their hands on the plates a gang in Florida is using for their own operation. Tommy successfully recovers the plates, but soon comes to realize the Sonny and Forellis have been raiding his businesses in order to strong-arm him back under their influence. By this point, Tommy's not only confident, but also fed up with Sonny and his antics. He decides to take the mob head-on and winds up killing some of the Forelli family's men. Interpreting this violent display as an act of all-out war against the family, the Forellis decide to intimidate Ken, Tommy's new lawyer, by threatening to kill his entire family. Fearing for his life, Ken quickly calls Tommy and asks him to handle the situation before things start to escalate. Tommy reassures Ken and goes about doing his own things like it's business as usual. Eventually, Tommy receives a call from Lance asking him to come down to the mansion in order to discuss something fairly important. Upon getting there, Ken lets Tommy know that he's in too deep now, and the Forellis are threatening to have him sleep with the fishes if things keep going on like this. Lance also tells Tommy that the Forellis are coming down from Liberty City to check up on him. This is when Tommy decides to let the Forellis know that this city is solely his operation to handle, and assigns Ken with filling up briefcases with counterfeit money ready for the Forellis' arrival, whereas Lance was tasked with assembling the rest of the Vercetti gang. Despite everything going smoothly, Sonny lets Tommy know that he's rather disappointed at how unreliable his old business partner is. Tommy doesn't budge. He lets Sonny know he's the person he suspects for throwing him behind bars 15 years ago. To Tommy's surprise, Sonny tells him he's been dealing with a rather close associate of his behind his back. That's when Lance reveals himself as a traitor and says how it's all just business in Vice City. After Lance's betrayal, Sonny confronts Tommy over the fake cash, and instead of backing down, Tommy decides it's the perfect time to have a shoot-down and finally get rid of Sonny. While the mob is trying to steal his money, Tommy pulls his guns out. Playing to his strengths, he wipes out the stream of assassins trying to raid his compound and eventually chases Lance to the roof of the building. On the rooftop, Lance set up an ambush waiting for Tommy, but despite everything, Tommy manages to finally kill his old friend. Dispatching the rest of Sonny's goons, Tommy set his scopes on the mob boss himself, who was responsible for setting him up 15 years ago. In his arrogance, Sonny disclosed how he had planned the whole thing and how none of it ever mattered to him. Infuriated by the shit talk, Tommy lets loose and swiftly annihilates everyone in sight. Finally, when the dust settles, the only ones left standing are Tommy and his old pal Ken. After a quick chat, Tommy lets Ken know that he's the one in charge now, and there's no one left to contest his power any longer. Both of them walk towards the giant doors of the mansion and bask in the sunlight, solemnly appreciating the views of Vice City. GTA San Andreas. Carl Johnson, better known as CJ, was born and raised in Grove Street, Los Santos, sharing a house with his mother, Beverly, brothers Sweet, Brian, and sister Kendall. Sweet, CJ, and their friends Big Smoke and Ryder joined the Grove Street Families gang as children, with Sweet working his way up the ranks to become the gang's leader, while Carl became the underboss. The Grove Street families gained power in Los Santos, often fighting with the Ballas and Vagos for control of the streets. In 1987, Brian, CJ's brother, died. The cause of his death was never revealed, though it is implied that Carl was present and did not attempt to help him. Sweet held Carl responsible for Brian's death, which led to Carl leaving Los Santos and moving to Liberty City, where he started working as a car thief for Joey Leone. The Grove Street families began losing power and eventually lost turf to the Ballas and the Vagos. 5 years later, in 1992, the Ballas planned to assassinate Sweet to deprive the families of their leader and take over their remaining territories. They performed a drive-by shooting on the Johnson house. However, instead of Sweet, the Ballas killed Beverly, his mother. Sweet phoned Carl to inform him of their mother's death, and Carl agreed to return to Los Santos for the funeral. He arrives at the airport and takes a taxi back to his mother's house. However, he is arrested en route by Frank, Eddie, and Jimmy, police officers from a corrupt LSPD unit called Crash. They steal his belongings and threaten to frame him for the murder of another officer unless he works for them whenever they summon him. After Crash let him go, warning Carl that they will be watching him, he finally makes his way to his mother's house, where he reunites with his friend, Big Smoke. After he promises CJ that they will learn who killed his mother, the pair drive to the funeral, where Carl reunites with the rest of his family. Sweet is displeased with Carl's return, claiming that Carl ran away. Suddenly, the Ballas attempt to drive by, destroying Smoke's car. After escaping the drive-by, CJ, Sweet, Smoke, and Ryder race back to Grove Street. Seeing the state of the gang, Carl decides to stay and help get Grove Street back on its feet. At first, he does small jobs, such as spraying enemy tags, clearing the hood of crack dealers, and performing drive-bys in the Ballas' territory. Eventually, he moves on to bigger operations, such as stealing weapons for fellow gang members from various sources across Los Santos. During this time, CJ also reunites with another friend and occasional gang member, OG Loke, who was just released from prison. Later, Sweet asks CJ to spy on Kendall's new boyfriend, Cesar, who is the leader of the Hispanic gang called Varios Los Aztecas. Despite his initial prejudices, Carl discovers that Cesar is a good man and genuinely cares about Kendall. Later, he competes in a car race against Cesar, after which the two men become good friends. At the same time, CJ is summoned by Crash, who force him to help with their shady operations, such as burning down a house occupied by the Vagos and interrupting a meeting of the Russian mob. Eventually, CJ successfully takes over the Ballas territory of Glen Park and kills a former Grove Street member who joined the Ballas named Little Weasel. Shortly after, Sweet informs Carl that several high-ranking Ballas will be attending Weasel's funeral, and the brothers use this opportunity to kill them, weakening their enemy. With the Ballas severely weakened, Sweet decides it is time for Grove Street to regain control of Los Santos and plans to ambush a major group of Ballas to finally end the gang war. However, before CJ can join his brother, he is called by Cesar, who asks to meet him. Cesar reveals that he had been investigating the drive-by shooting that killed Beverly and learned that it was meant for Sweet. Just then, the pair spot Big Smoke, Ryder, Crash, and some Ballas exiting a garage containing a green Saber, the same car used in the drive-by. This makes CJ realize that Big Smoke and Ryder have sold out Grove Street to the Ballas and have been working with Crash all along. In addition to that, they were also the ones who organized the drive-by in an attempt to kill Sweet and wipe out the gang. After witnessing this, CJ concludes that Sweet must be headed into a trap and goes to save him, only to find him severely injured. Sweet orders Carl to leave, but Carl refuses and kills several waves of Ballas. However, the police soon arrive and arrest both Sweet and Carl. Sweet is taken to a prison hospital, whilst Carl is driven by Crash outside of Los Santos to the small town of Angel Pine. Crash warns Carl not to return to Los Santos and try to kill Big Smoke, otherwise Sweet will suffer in prison. They continue blackmailing CJ into working for them and task him with killing an informant under FBI protection who is threatening to reveal their corruption to the authorities. After the job is done, Carl decides to start making money and calls Cesar, who advises him to meet with his cousin Catalina. CJ meets Catalina and the pair perform various small-time robberies together, during which they enter a short-lived relationship. Carl is soon summoned by Crash Officer Frank for another job and is introduced to a hippie named The Truth. Frank asks CJ to assist The Truth in producing a large amount of drugs, which he will be needing in the near future. Shortly after, Carl calls Cesar and insists that he leaves Los Santos with Kendall, as the Grove Street families and Varios Los Aztecas are both disbanded, and their territories taken over by other gangs. CJ meets with Cesar and Kendall and rents them a trailer home in Angel Pine until he finds a better place for all of them to stay. Later, Carl begins competing in car races to earn money and meets Woozy, the blind leader of the Mountain Club Boys subsection of the San Fierro Triads, during one of the races. Carl also competes in a race against Catalina's new boyfriend Claude, earning himself a garage in San Fierro. Something's telling me you're going to hear much more about this Claude guy before the video is over. Anyway, after parting ways with Catalina, who leaves for Liberty City with Claude, CJ returns to The Truth, who informs him that the marijuana supply for Tenpenny is ready. However, the police finds out about the weed farm, forcing CJ and The Truth to torch the marijuana fields and destroy a police helicopter with a rocket launcher, before driving away with the drugs. Not long after, Frank calls Carl to tell him it is time to use the drugs and orders him to plant them in the trunk of a district attorney's car because he has been investigating Frank and Crash. Carl does as he is told, and the attorney is arrested. One day, Cesar calls CJ to inform him of a Ballas car seen leaving the Mulholland intersection and heading towards the countryside. They follow it to Angel Pine, where they take photos of a meeting between Ryder and some other men. CJ and Cesar soon learn that the men, Jizzy, T-Bone, and Torino, are the leaders of the Loco Syndicate, an organization supplying drugs to Big Smoke, Ryder, and the Ballas. Deciding to eliminate the organization, Carl first infiltrates it by offering his services to Jizzy. After several missions for the organization, CJ eventually earns their trust before turning on them and killing Jizzy. From Jizzy's phone, CJ then learns about the syndicate's next meeting with the Ballas, which he ambushes with the help of Cesar and the Triads, killing both T-Bone and Ryder. He later destroys Torino's helicopter, seemingly killing him, as well as the syndicate's drug factory, putting them out of business. Sometime later, CJ receives a phone call from a man using a distorted voice, demanding that he come to a ranch in Tierra Robada. There, Carl is surprised to find Torino still alive, who reveals himself as the caller. Torino explains to CJ that Sweet is in a prison upstate, safe. He proceeds to explain that he is an undercover government agent and demands that CJ assists him with several shady operations in exchange for Sweet's freedom. With no other choice, Carl agrees. He's later asked to buy an abandoned airstrip in the desert and learn to fly planes and helicopters, which helps him with his next set of missions. Shortly after, CJ receives a phone call from Woozy, his friend and gang leader he met sometime prior. Woozy is now a successful businessman and has opened a casino in Las Venturas, telling Carl to come visit him. CJ moves to Las Venturas, only to discover that the casino business is not doing as well as intended, due to facing opposition from the Leone, Sindaco, and Forelli mafia families of Liberty City. Carl agrees to assist and helps defend Woozy and the casino from rival mob families. As revenge, Carl helps Woozy plan a robbery of the rival Caligula's casino, which is run by the mob. He performs numerous jobs in preparation for the heist, such as stealing some dynamite, photographing the plans of the casino, stealing a swipe card, and setting explosives at the city dam. In the end, the heist is carried out successfully, weakening the mob and allowing Woozy to freely run his casino. Woozy even asks Carl to become his business partner, and they start running the casino together. Later, Carl receives a call from The Truth, who asks him to pick up his two friends from a rock band that ended up drugged out of their minds in the middle of a desert. CJ goes to save the band's manager Paul and lead singer Macker from the desert and brings them to Caligula's casino, where Paul's old friend Ken Rosenberg is working as the manager. Yeah, these are the same Ken and Paul from Vice City. Seeing this as another opportunity to infiltrate, CJ begins working with Ken in order to earn the mob's trust. Soon learning that Ken is caught between all three families and is living in fear of getting assassinated every day. This soon escalates into a war between all three families, prompting one of the family's leader, Salvatore Leone, to travel to Las Venturas and take over the casino. CJ offers his services to Salvatore, who employs him to help him in his conflict with the other two families, so that he would gain more control over the casino. He first sends Carl to kill several hitmen arriving in the city by plane, and later to travel to Liberty City to assassinate the Forelli family's Don, Marco Forelli. By the way, Marco Forelli is a brother of Sonny Forelli, the main antagonist of Vice City. Marco took Sonny's place as the head of the family after Sonny was killed by Tommy at the end of that game. After all this is done, Carl is summoned by Frank and Eddie for one final job and is ordered to kill a DEA agent and collect a dossier. Carl successfully collects the dossier, but when he comes back to deliver it, he's held at gunpoint and told to dig a hole for himself and Jimmy, another crash officer who turned out to be a traitor. Frank leaves Eddie in charge of burying the two and drives off. However, Jimmy somehow tackles Eddie and gets killed, but his gun ends up in CJ's hands, who manages to kill Eddie. With Woozy's casino a success, Carl finds the task of running it boring and soon decides to return to Los Santos with Kendall and Cesar. Soon after coming back, he receives a surprise visit from Torino, who demands one last favor: to steal a military jet and use it to destroy some spy ships. Carl does so, and Torino keeps his promise by having Sweet released early. He then goes to pick up his brother and tries to impress him with all the new businesses he got since he left Los Santos. However, Sweet is not happy with Carl's new lifestyle, which led to him neglecting the gang. To prove his loyalty, Carl takes his brother back to Ganton, and they work together to reclaim Grove Street from the Ballas, re-establishing the Grove Street families. The Johnson brothers then begin to reclaim their gang's turf from their rivals and attempt to track down Big Smoke. Meanwhile, Frank, the last member of Crash, is finally arrested and put on trial for several charges, but is released due to a lack of evidence. This angers the people of Los Santos, leading to a citywide riot. During this time, Grove Street families slowly grow in power, and Sweet soon learns Big Smoke's whereabouts. The Johnson brothers head to Smoke's crack palace to kill him for his betrayal of the gang, but CJ convinces Sweet to let him deal with Smoke on his own to make up for all his mistakes. Fighting his way through the fortress, Carl eventually confronts Big Smoke and attempts to reason with him, but he opens fire. In the ensuing firefight, Carl fatally shoots Smoke, who admits to having betrayed the gang for money and claims that everybody will remember his name, Big Smoke, before dying. As Carl laments Smoke's death, claiming it was a waste, Frank arrives to collect his share of Smoke's money to flee the city. CJ jumped into cover to avoid getting shot by Frank, who quickly fled the scene in a fire truck. CJ and Sweet chase him through the chaotic city while defending him from the police and rioting gang members. Frank eventually loses control of the fire truck and crashes off the bridge over Grove Street. After claiming that he cleaned up the streets, Frank finally dies as CJ, his friends, and family watch. The Truth congratulates Carl on beating the system before they head into the Johnson house to celebrate. With Frank dead, the riots come to an end and justice is finally restored in Los Santos. Grand Theft Auto 1, 1997. The debut title that started it all, Grand Theft Auto 1, takes place sometime in 1997. Same as in the London expansions, the story follows an unnamed protagonist chosen by the player who gets instructions through payphones scattered around the city. You start the game in Liberty City, near South Park. The first gig involves recovering a car for your undisclosed contacts. Then, the protagonist is told to pick up a cab to act as a getaway driver for the heist. Following this successful heist, the crook you help out tells you Bubby has a safe house to store the cash. Appreciative of your services, Bubby decides to give the protagonist another job. He wants to send a biker group called the Angels a message for messing with one of his dealers. The protagonist then steals one of their bikes with the drugs and drives it back to one of Bubby's compounds. The protagonist then winds up bombing a precinct to kill off a police chief. And on their way back, they also kill off a lawyer who works for Don Cinetti, the leader of the Cinetti crime family. Bubby, also known as Robert Seragliano, is supposedly the head of the Vercotti crime family that the protagonist is working for. After proceeding with his task, Bubby asks the protagonist to steal some cabs, murder his brother, and also stop a subway shipment for the Cinettis with a bomb. All of this mayhem and destruction eventually attracts Don Cinetti's attention, and the protagonist gets threatened to back off by his right-hand man, Cabot. Clearly unfazed by the direct threats, the protagonist continues to work for the Vercotti family despite the danger. Soon enough, another shipment for the Cinettis apparently makes its way to town, and you're told to go and intercept their package before they do. It winds up being a ruse, but the protagonist easily handles it and then goes on to help Bubby interrupt an important deal for the Cinettis. Considering how violent and frequent the crimes committed by the Vercottis are, the police have started to pay special attention to Bubby and his operation within the city. In order to keep himself safe, Bubby buys you a ticket to San Andreas immediately after. As soon as you arrive in San Andreas, a contact of Uncle Fu, a leader of a crime syndicate in San Andreas, reaches out to the protagonist and offers them jobs to do around the city. Most of the jobs are just simple errands the protagonist has to do in order to gain Uncle Fu's trust. Eventually, Uncle Fu's nephew, No-Chin, plants bombs across the city, and you're tasked with disarming them before things get out of hand. After driving around the entire city disarming bombs, you're told that No-Chin has escaped Uncle Fu's custody again, and now you're responsible for putting him out of his misery. After finishing up all the missions in West Market, the protagonist is invited to meet Uncle Fu directly as a reward for their efforts. While on their first mission in the Sunview area, the protagonist gets duped into stealing a briefcase by a contact on the payphones. The briefcase, however, was a trick, and the protagonist had no choice but to follow the voice's directions in order to not get blown up to bits. After following each order to a T, the voice disables the bomb. Eventually, the DA gets a hold of a crucial piece of evidence against Uncle Fu's empire, and the protagonist is assigned to kill him before things get out of hand. You are also asked to intercept a bus full of ammunition arriving in San Andreas in order to send the mayor a message for not cooperating with your Uncle Fu. Uncle Fu also gives you the duty to go out and kill a fellow mob boss and take out some lawyers. Dispatching away with these tasks, the protagonist finally gets to meet Uncle Fu in person. Following their meeting, the protagonist gets in contact with a Mexican crime boss named El Burro. After doing a couple of jobs for him, you gain El Burro's trust and decide to seek an audience with him. After the chat, Elborough decides to move his base of operations to Vice City, and the protagonist willfully tags along. After some time in Vice City, the protagonist gets approached by a person named Samuel Deaver, who's the chief of the Vice Squad, which is an elite branch of police officers. Deaver blackmails the protagonist in order to have them run errands for him and commit crimes that he couldn't himself. The protagonist's first job is to bring back Deaver's kids from his ex-wife. Then they're asked to steal a reporter's car, steal back Deaver's daughter's car, and drive his wife around town. Deaver eventually returns later to dish out some tall orders for the protagonist. Now you're tasked with rigging a limousine with explosives and using it to blow up an informant for the Jamaican gang. The Jamaican gang is called Brotherhood of Jah Army of Love, and they're also referred to as the Rastas. Apparently, Deaver has beef with the Rastas, and his demands for the protagonist get progressively violent. For example, bombing one of the Rastas' safe houses, extorting their dealers, and waging a full-on war against their entire operation. After offing a significant number of Rastas and instigating a turf war between their forces, Deaver makes the protagonist sell drugs for him. Of course, Deaver's illegal activities don't go unnoticed, despite how hard he tried to censor any opposition from the police force. With the heat on him progressively building up, Deaver uses the protagonist to clean up his own mess and get the heat off himself. Eventually, Deaver meets the protagonist face to face and threatens him over working for anybody else. It's not long before Deaver sets his sights back on the Rastas and starts making moves to further antagonize them. Unfortunately, during one of their jobs, instead of stopping a Cuban shipment of drugs, the protagonist winds up accidentally killing Deaver's wife. Immediately after, the Rastas offer their help and protection against Deaver's wrath. Hence, the protagonist starts working for the Rastas now and decides to do some odd jobs for them. Not only that, the protagonist is also ordered to take out the president's wife. After participating in what seems like a myriad of terror attacks within Vice City, the Brotherhood of Jah Army of Love finally retires the protagonist and pays them for the services. This is where the story of GTA 1 concludes. Man, GTA was definitely a lot crazier back in the day. GTA Liberty City Stories. In 1994, Tony Cipriani, a member of the Leone crime family, left Liberty City in order to lay low after killing a rival mafia member under orders from his boss, Salvatore Leone. 4 years later, in 1998, an inconspicuous bus rolls into Liberty City and Tony steps out of it. He stops at a payphone and informs his bosses of his return. After several years away from the city, Tony finally comes face to face with his old boss, Salvatore Leone. Unfortunately, since Tony was away for so long, his position within the Leone family hierarchy has changed, and now he must follow orders from his replacement, Vincenzo Chili. Tony and Vincenzo don't really get along from the get-go, yet Tony plays along in order to rise up the ranks again. Tony's first job is to make sure one of Vincenzo's dealers brings in money for him. After intimidating the driver, Tony simply drives the man around to secure his deals. Assuming his job is done, Tony reports back to Vincenzo, only to find out that the dealer got wasted by a rival gang called the Syndicos. Vincenzo then orders Tony to secure the Leone's turf in Chinatown. Tony follows his orders to a T and single-handedly fights off every Syndico leader on Leone's turf. Sensing that Tony's violent tendencies would be a great fit for more intimidating purposes, Vincenzo assigns him with the task of swaying a Syndico defector named JD to their side. Tony wastes no time and eradicates the Syndico muscle responsible for overseeing JD's operation and gets filmed by JD while doing so. Satisfied with his handiwork, Tony steals a car from the dead mafia members and takes it back to the safe house with him. Soon after, Vincenzo informs Tony that he's responsible for making sure his men get escorted back after a failed raid at a gas station. Tony humbly obliges and swoops in on a car to pick up the men, despite the place being surrounded by the cops. Even though Tony is more than capable of carrying out big jobs, Vincenzo instead asks Tony to pick up his car for him because he's under strict federal surveillance. Despite Tony's protests, he's still forced to carry out favors for his superior. Once he secured the car, Tony was ambushed by a bunch of cops who set up a trap for him in advance. Soon after, Tony starts hounding JD for money, and both of them wind up collecting it from the girls on his payroll around town. Since Tony treated JD somewhat nicely, JD calls him in for a favor. Salvatore Leone himself was inside JD's strip club when the cops decided to raid his business. Fearing a lifetime in jail, JD asks Tony to drive Salvatore back to his safe house in Liberty City. Pleased by Tony's efforts to keep him safe, Salvatore decides to take Vincenzo off Tony's back and starts giving him jobs himself. JD winds up giving Tony another job to go and blow up one of the main Syndico businesses in order to cripple the rival group and win over some favors from Salvatore Leone. With a vehicle rigged with explosives parked inside the building, Tony detonates the bomb and blows up the entire establishment. With nothing else to do for now, Tony decides to meet his mother, who reached out to him through a phone call. At her house, Tony gets chewed out by his mother for neglecting to call her during his time away from the city. Jealous of his mom's adoration for a special person named Giovanni Casa, Tony decides to grab his camera and tails the man in order to catch him doing something he shouldn't. Not long after, Tony winds up snapping a picture of Casa partaking in perverted acts, yet that photo fails to sway his mother. Desperate for his mother's attention, Tony returns to her house once again, but gets promptly turned away. Since his mother believes Tony is afraid of the triads, he goes on to eradicate their presence within the area. Still not impressed with Tony, his mother forces him to race against a prolific racer named Sucho. Regardless of his multiple attempts to win his mother over, Tony still winds up getting the short end of the stick, especially when his mother put a hit on him. After taking care of the multiple hitmen, Tony decides to cut his losses and let her be. Soon after, he pays Salvatore Leone a visit. At the Leone safe houses, Tony is ordered to go and pay off a union boss named Jane Hopper for her cooperation. Salvatore needs her to keep the docks empty for his drug smuggling operation. Unfortunately, the deal goes sour and the union boss makes her goons beat down Tony, who narrowly escapes the docks. Reporting back to Salvatore, Tony gets roped into another plan to make Jane's people cooperate. He's made to drive around town and steal women from the pimps in order to drop them back at the docks to sway the union's members. This gesture still wasn't enough to sway some of the big players in the union, so Tony's next task was to violently persuade each big shot to comply with Leone's plans. After posing as Jane's limo driver, Tony manages to convince her to comply with Leone's demands for the time being. Not long after that, Tony gets a call from Salvatore's wife, Maria Latorre, and gets roped into driving her around town. Charmed by his devilishly good looks, Maria makes Tony's life a living hell by constantly flirting with him and orchestrating problems to bring the two closer together. However, things come to an abrupt end for their romance once Maria finds out Tony isn't rich enough to afford her lavish desires. Afterward, Tony is asked to oversee a drug deal for Salvatore at the docks and gets ambushed by the cops during the handover. However, things go smoothly and Tony brings back the shipment to one of the Leone's safe houses. Now that Tony has reclaimed his position in the Leone family, he receives a call from his old pal JD to catch up. Their reunion goes sour, however, once Tony finds out through JD that Salvatore was kidnapped by syndicos right outside his club. Packed in the back of a guy's trunk, Salvatore gets rescued by Tony just in the nick of time. Saving Salvatore earned Tony a massive amount of respect. It's not long after that, Salvatore starts suspecting a betrayal from within, and thus narrows his search down to JD. Even though JD was Tony's friend, the latter drove him to a junkyard in order to execute him and then dumped the body in the river. Fearing Tony's ascent within the ranks of the Leone family, Vincenzo tricks Tony by inviting him to the docks on the pretense of overseeing a drug deal. Trapped on a freight ship, Tony mowed down an army of chainsaw-wielding assailants before finally putting Vincenzo down. Meanwhile, the Diablo, a Latin American gang, is beginning to encroach on Leone territory in Hepburn, and Tony is called in by Salvatore to initiate a fully fledged gang war between the two groups. Unfortunately, by the time Tony handled the situation, several of Leone's men were killed, and their control over the Hepburn area diminished significantly. Undeterred by his losses, Salvatore assures Tony and later calls him in to carry out another favor for him. During a casual money stash pickup from one of Salvatore's safe houses, the Triads rig the place with explosives, and Tony's forced to watch as his boss's cash burns to a crisp right in front of him. Tony collects as much as the remaining money as he can before reporting back to his boss. Back at the safe house, Salvatore is beginning to grow incredibly paranoid, and he is starting to believe someone is out to get him, specifically the mayor of Liberty City. Going along with his boss's plans, Tony drives him down to the docks, only to find out that the place is filled with cops. In a state of panic, Tony is forced to drive a car over an unfinished bridge and miraculously reaches the other side to a Leone safe house where he decides to lie low for a while. Eventually, Tony gets told by Salvatore to take out the mayor and retrieve his phone. Tony does exactly that and triumphantly returns to the safe house only to find out that Salvatore is gone and has left a letter for him. According to the letter, some of Salvatore's men will come to pick Tony up and take him to an undisclosed location. Even though he's skeptical of his ride, Tony willingly plays along and gets escorted to Salvatore, where he gets promoted to a respectable rank within the crime syndicate. Now, with more responsibilities to handle, Tony fits right in and soon gets another job that involves him rigging an election for the mayor of Liberty City. Since the last mayor was in cahoots with the Forelli crime family, Salvatore now wants their own representative in the office to further solidify their control over Liberty City. Donald Love is the businessman the Leones want as mayor, and it's Tony's job to make sure he gets elected. In order to get the win, Tony goes around town slandering the opponents, killing the campaigners, burning voting equipment, protecting Donald from hitmen, and rigging votes. In the middle of all of this, Salvatore asks Tony to join him for an interrogation of the previous mayor's assistant. Although he was anticipating an admission, Salvatore finds out that the mayor was actually following orders issued by the Sicilians who wanted to start a gang war between the Liberty City crime families. Soon after, Salvatore decides to go and spy on the Forellis, but ends up getting caught, so Tony has to save him again. Apparently, the Syndicos and Forellis had gone to war with each other, and Salvatore was stuck in the middle of it all. After saving his boss, Tony gets pulled into another job that involves him hijacking Syndico's car and sabotaging their attempts at brokering peace with the Forellis. Since the feud between Syndicos and Forellis is advantageous to Salvatore, he has Tony make sure the gang war keeps going on without fail. Eventually, Tony meets up with a crooked cop named Leone McCaffrey, who gives him a few jobs that further tighten the hold the Leone family has over the city. After killing what seems like an endless barrage of Syndico and Forelli men, Tony's friendship with Leon comes to an abrupt end. Leon informs him about the feds going after Salvatore and asks to be distanced from the whole affair. Following a lead given to him by Leon, Tony winds up doing a few jobs for a priest at the Liberty City Cathedral. He committed crimes that involved killing federal witnesses, stealing a rare diamond, rampaging across the city with a fire truck, and killing celebrities who refused to give interviews to the Liberty Tree newspaper. Usual stuff. However, after all of that, Tony finds out that the person who was giving him orders wasn't a priest, but a crooked reporter from the Liberty Tree newspaper named Ned Burner. Since Tony already had his hands full taking care of Donald's victory in the upcoming elections, he let Ned go for the time being. Before long, Donald informs Tony that his affiliation with the Leone family is going to jeopardize his chances of winning since his opposition has evidence against him. Despite Tony's efforts, the news comes out, and unfortunately, Donald is deemed unfit for office soon after. Now bankrupt from his failed political campaign, Donald lost to his political opponent O'Donovan and subsequently put Salvatore's position of power in danger. Eventually, the law catches up with the crime boss, and Tony's forced to pose as a lawyer in order to meet Salvatore in prison. Visibly infuriated by his current condition, Tony's boss tells him to make sure to exact revenge on the Forellis lurking around town. Once the task is done, Tony gets issued new orders that involve taking out Paulie Syndico, a don of the Syndico crime family. Tony manages to do so, but he now has another problem, as Yakuza is threatening to assume control of Liberty City. After taking out their secret tank, Tony successfully foils the Yakuza's invasion. Meanwhile, Donald's mentor, Avery Carrington, is making his way back to the city, and Donald needs Tony to help him carry out a plan that will make both men very rich. According to Donald, since Avery is a hugely successful real estate agent, he's the perfect target for a heist. After killing Avery and stealing his plans, Donald lets Tony know that a reporter took photos of them killing Avery. The reporter turns out to be the same man who was pretending to be the church priest and fooled Tony earlier, Ned Burner. Tony pays Ned a surprise visit at the church and persuades him to lead the pair back to where the photos are being kept. Ned attempts to escape Tony's clutches, only to be chased down and killed soon after. A while after that, Tony gets a call from a woman named Toshiko Kosen, the wife of the Yakuza boss, Kazuki Kosen. Toshiko wants Tony to weaken the Yakuza and get rid of her husband, and she's ready to pay handsomely. After a few stints with the Yakuza, Tony eventually comes face to face with Kazuki and slays him with his own katana. Unfortunately, instead of getting paid, Tony just witnessed Toshiko take her own life once she was free from her husband's tyranny. With no time to lament what had just happened, Tony gets roped into Donald's schemes yet again. This time, he needs to blow up Staunton's underground subway tunnels. After rigging several of the tunnels with explosives, Tony manages to blow up a significant part of the city and kills several civilians. But that's not all. Tony's also forced to help Donald leave town because he was being hunted down by the Colombians. Back at the prison, Salvatore has a meeting with Tony and rejoices over the fact that he might be able to get bail and leave prison soon. However, before that, he wants Tony to take care of any Sicilian welcoming committee waiting for him outside the courthouse. With blockades all over the city, Tony successfully manages to get Salvatore to the court and helps him get his long-awaited freedom. With the Syndicos and Forellis taken care of, and with the Sicilians asking for peace, Salvatore has nothing to worry about except asking the mayor to have his charges dropped. Unfortunately, by the time Salvatore and Tony get to the mayor's office, the Sicilians have abducted the mayor because of Salvatore's refusal to establish peace between the families. They soon manage to save the mayor, and in the process, they earn his loyalty. Sometime after, Salvatore and Tony finally pay Salvatore's uncle a visit. Salvatore's uncle was apparently the mob boss responsible for making his life hell, and making peace with him is important for Leone's reign over Liberty City. After their reunion, Salvatore assures Tony that he's going to get paid $1 million for his excellent services, and with his boss's respect, the Liberty City stories ends. GTA 2. GTA 2 is a weird game. First of all, the year it takes place in was never specified, but it should be somewhere around early 2000s. There isn't a clear story being followed in this game. There are also no cutscenes, nor any continuity between missions. It all feels like one big experiment. In short, GTA 2 is set in a semi-futuristic metropolitan known as Anywhere City. The game follows the story of a cryogenically frozen cook who gets unfrozen sometime in the future and his eventual rise to power. The main character's name is Cloud Speed, and he spends his time working for all kinds of gangs and crime syndicates. Eventually, by the end, he ends up betraying his bosses and replacing them with himself. He also takes over the entire city and commits a whole host of unspeakable crimes in the process. GTA Advance 2000. In the year 2000, Mike and Vinny, two small-time crooks, are trying to make a few bucks to finally leave Liberty City behind. They're sorta broke, but Vinny has jobs and contacts with the mafia that can help them both achieve their dreams. Reluctantly, Mike agrees to work with Vinny for the mafia, and the duo get orders issued to them at a business front called Mama's Restaurant in St. Mike's. Mike's first order of business is to put an ungrateful mafia dealer named Federico out of his misery for using mafia products rather than selling them. Since Mike didn't have a weapon, Vinny loans him some cash in order to purchase one from an acquaintance of his named 8-Ball. With a weapon in hand from Ammunition, Mike takes out Federico and wins over the mafia's favor. Although the mafia agreed to help them get out of the city, according to Vinny, the duo need a car to make it happen. He instructs Mike to go and steal a Banshee from a lot in Atlantic Quays. Despite some mild opposition, Mike brings the car back in one piece, with a new paint job as well. After stealing a fast car, the mafia requests the pair to shake down some of their clientele and collect some protection money for them. At this point, Mike questions why they even have to do this and whether it is even related to their escape from the city. Eventually, he obliged and took down several individuals to collect what the mafia was due. Since the mafia felt disrespected by their people in Trenton, they went to hire Mike and Vinny to wipe them out of the area in order to send the rest of the folks a message. Mike gets the job done, and now all the duo need to do to finally leave the city is get some fake IDs. Luckily enough for Mike, Vinny's friend 8-Ball's already got them covered. With everything regarding the escape from the city handled, Mike gets a call from Vinny and gets told to visit him in Callahan Point before leaving. Upon his arrival, Mike witnesses Vinny's car burst into flames and explode right in front of him. With the cops hot on his tail, Mike decides to go back to his hideout. However, he soon gets called by 8-Ball, who informs him that the hideout has been compromised. So, instead of going home, Mike heads over to 8-Ball's place instead. As it turns out, Vinny had all of their money on him before he died, so now things don't look that good for Mike. In order to get back to his feet, Mike decides to do a few jobs for 8-Ball. His first order of business is to bring back the rubble from the car explosion that killed Vinny so that 8-Ball can analyze it and find out what happened. In order to get information on Vinny's killer, 8-Ball sends Mike to pick up a few ladies for some high-income clients. Once one of 8-Ball's girls comes back with some information regarding the kind of folks Vinny was hanging around with before he died. Bidding 8-Ball farewell, Mike goes to the docks in order to meet with a shady bartender named Johnny. Apparently, Vinny owed Johnny a fair bit of money, and since Mike was his partner, now he's forced to work for Johnny and repay his partner's debt. However, the bartender agrees to help look for Vinny's killer. The jobs are pretty simple: collect money from people around town, pick up girls, sell bootleg liquor, bomb a rival business. Mike even has to steal a rocket launcher at one point. In between all of this, Johnny finds out that Vinny's killer isn't a mafia boss, but he does owe the mafia a fair bit of money regardless. Eventually, Johnny lets Mikey know that the Yardies, the Jamaican gang, is looking to collect money from Johnny on the orders of their boss, King Courtney. While on a casual run to retrieve some money, Mike comes back to the bar to find out that Johnny's been massacred by the Yardies while he was away. Mike gives chase to the perpetrator's car as soon as they leave the premises and winds up following them into Staunton Island. After finally cornering their boss, King Courtney, Mike decides to confront him. Surprisingly enough, according to him, the Yardies weren't the ones who carried out the hit. They just discovered the body instead. Since King Courtney wanted his own money back too, he offered to give Mike some jobs while he investigated the murder and looked for the killer. During this time, the Yardies have Mike take part in a Formula 1 race against the Yakuza, and also take out hitmen sent by the Colombian cartel. Mike eventually winds up meeting and talking face-to-face with the cartel leader, Cisco. Mike asks him about Vinny, and after some intimidation, Cisco tells Mike that he's not the person responsible for Vinny's death. Neither is he behind any of the recent bombings. According to Cisco, only the Yardies and the Yakuza would be capable of organizing such a hit. After hearing him out, Mike decides to work for Cisco for the time being while the search for Vinny's killer is ongoing. Eventually, Cisco asks Mike to go and kidnap the niece of the Yakuza boss, Yuka. After abducting Yuka from outside her school, Cisco informs Mike that his services are no longer needed. Following his termination, Mike chose to go and work for the Yakuza instead. The Yakuza boss, Asuka, first orders Mike to go out and rescue her niece, no matter what. Even though Mike was the one who kidnapped Yuka, he didn't think twice when it came to fixing his mistakes. The only reward he wanted was for the Yakuza to use its resources and find out who actually took out Vinny. Yuka's rescue turns out to be a major success, but Mike has to carry a couple more jobs for the Yakuza, like extorting money, fixing a game by injuring an athlete, intimidating Asuka's ex, and investigating her sushi supplier. After beating up a pimp and sharing some personal time with his boss, Mike finally gets a lead on the bomber responsible for Vinny's death. Despite racing over to the bomber's hideout, Mike gets there a bit too late and finds a dead body at the premises instead. Stuck between the corpse's hand was a note that led Mike to Shoreside Island, where someone ordered the exact same kind of bomb that was used on Vinny's car. There, Mike finds out that the man who commissioned the bomber was Cisco, the boss of the Colombian cartel, all along. However, as it turns out, Cisco is not the one who ordered Vinny's hit, and he instead sends Mike to find out why the bomber did what he did and who was responsible for his murder. While looking for a lead, Mike gets ambushed by a group of people presumably sent by Vinny's killer, but manages to fend them off. Sometime later, Mike gets ambushed yet again by one of the killer's goons and finds out that Cisco is their new target. Even though Mike raced back to the Shoreside Island airport, he was too late to save Cisco. Infuriated, Mike decides to take matters into his own hands and tails the car that was trying to escape the premises. After driving the car off the road, Mike discovers that the killer in the driving seat was none other than Vinny, his partner, all along. As it turns out, the bombing was an elaborate setup the whole time, and Vinny just wanted all the money they earned for himself. Angered by his former friend and his condescending attitude towards him, Mike decides to shoot Vinny and kill him. Before leaving the scene of the crime, Mike also recovered all of Vinny's money. Back at Mama's restaurant, Mike pays a visit to his old friend 8-Ball, who's back in town. According to 8-Ball, he had no clue about Vinny's plans and only came to know about it from the goons that were sent to kill him. Suddenly, their reunion gets interrupted by an ambush by the Colombian cartel. They think that Mike is the one responsible for Cisco's death, and they've come seeking revenge. During the commotion, 8-Ball gets wounded and chooses to stay back in favor of letting Mike escape. After single-handedly massacring half of the cartel, Mike somehow makes his escape despite the pressure. At this point, Mike has had enough, and instead of lying low, he decides to attack the new cartel leader and finally put an end to this. However, Mike has one more surprise waiting for him. After pounding some sense into the new cartel boss, Mike finds out through him that it was actually King Courtney, the Yardies leader, who put a hit on him in order to steal Vinny's money. To make sure he finally ends this, Mike goes roaming all over the city looking for Yardies to take out so they would report it back to their boss. Now with the Yardies' forces dwindled, Mike asks Asuka for the Yakuza's help, and they come up with a plan to infiltrate King Courtney's compound together. With a few of the Yakuza's men, Mike enters the building from a less guarded entrance, but gets abandoned by the men once the other Yardies get involved. Despite being left alone, Mike somehow makes his way to King Courtney, and after eliminating an army of his goons, finally confronts him. Satisfied by King Courtney begging for mercy, Mike decides to leave him be and makes his escape on a military tank while being chased by seemingly every cop in the city. Mike drives all the way to Cisco's plane at the airport and gets in. The game ends with him finally achieving his dream and taking off, leaving Liberty City for good. GTA 3 2001. The main protagonist of GTA 3 is Claude, who you may remember as a side character from GTA San Andreas. After the events of GTA San Andreas, Claude and Cataline, CJ's ex-girlfriend, began their journey to Liberty City. On their way there, the pair went through many American states committing bank robberies, namely Texas and New Mexico, until they eventually arrived at Liberty City 9 years later in 2001. At the very start of the game, we can see that Claude and Catalina are robbing a bank in Liberty City. Claude believes he's going to become rich. However, unexpectedly, Catalina betrays him and shoots him. Afterward, Claude is arrested, found guilty, and sentenced to 10 years in prison. As he is being transferred to the prison, the police convoy is ambushed by the Colombian cartel, which is interested in retrieving one of its members. Claude and another prisoner named 8-Ball sees this opportunity to escape as well. 8-Ball introduces Claude to some of his friends, the Leone Mafia family, and the latter gradually earns their trust by doing several jobs for them. And in case you are wondering, yeah, it's the same Leone Mafia from the Liberty City stories. As the days go by, Claude meets more members of the family until he eventually meets Joey, who entrusts Claude with a mission of revenge. The Forelli brothers owe him money, and Joey wants one of them dead. Claude finds the designated car and takes it to 8-Ball to equip it with explosives. Once he drives it back to the parking lot, one of the Forelli brothers steps in and the car blows up. The next day, Claude also meets Tony Cipriani, another member of the Leone Mafia, and someone you probably remember very well. Tony needs to collect some protection money from a laundry in Chinatown, but when Claude drives him there, they realize that they have fallen right into the trap of the Triad. In any case, the two of them manage to make it out of there alive. Right next, Joey needs Claude's assistance again. The young man meets some of Joey's friends and drives them to the bank so they can perform a heist. This time, the heist unfolds smoothly for Claude, who waits patiently for the armed men and drives them back to safety when they are done. However, the action never stops for Claude, who is now called again by Tony. Tony wants to get some payback on the Triad and orders Claude to destroy one of their laundry vans. Claude does just that, and he chases one of the laundry vans through the city. After shooting it for a while, the van is destroyed and its passengers are killed. As the situation around the city becomes increasingly unstable, Salvatore, a don of the Leone Mafia, calls for a meeting. There, Don also meets Claude and has him babysit his girlfriend Maria for a day. Unfortunately, the day ends roughly as the club where Maria attends a party is raided by the police. Despite this, Claude acts quickly and gets her back home safely. One day later, Tony decides it's time to deal with the triad once and for all. He has Claude drive a dust cart armed with heavy explosives at a warehouse controlled by the triad and detonate them once he is at a safe distance. Claude carries out this mission as well and watches the warehouse get destroyed. However, the Leone family now has a bigger problem. The Colombian cartel is making a drug called Spank, and they also seem to know Salvatore's every move. The Don has Claude follow a man named Bob, who is suspected of being a rat. Indeed, Claude sees him talk to the cartel, of which his ex-girlfriend Catalina is now a member. After killing Bob, Salvatore wants Claude to destroy the floating lab where the cartel makes Spank. Claude recruits 8-Ball for this mission as he is an expert in explosives. He buys him time by eliminating some cartel guards, and 8-Ball places explosives all over the floating facility. Eventually, 8-Ball blows the facility to pieces while he runs away with Claude. However, things take an unexpected turn when Claude is called by Salvatore for yet another mission. On the way, he is intercepted by Maria and a friend of hers, Oscar. Maria informs Claude that she told Salvatore they have a secret relationship and now the Don wants him dead. Claude escapes the city by sea along with the two women. Once they are safe away from the city, Oscar tells him that she is with the Yakuza and she can provide work for him. However, he has to prove that he has no ties to the Leone family anymore, and the only way to do that is by killing Salvatore. Claude goes back to the city and waits patiently until Salvatore leaves the club. After he pulls the trigger, Claude is finally ready to start his new life. As soon as he gets back to Oscar, Claude starts meeting some new people. One of them is Kenji, Oscar's brother, who runs his own casino. Oscar sends Claude on his first mission with the Yakuza, which is to get rid of some police agents who are trying to keep an eye on her. Later, Claude also meets Ray, a corrupt police officer who is being investigated by internal affairs. Afterward, Kenji wants Claude to break one of his friends out of a police station before he is taken to trial. Claude tweaks his car to look like a police car and completes the mission, which earns him the respect of Kenji. Kenji also informs Claude that he is running into trouble with the Colombian cartel. He has warned them to stay out of his business, but the cartel is trying to form an alliance with the Jamaicans and take full control of the city. To send them a message, Claude and one of Kenji's men steal a cartel car while also killing a few cartel members. Although Claude did exactly what he was told, Kenji snaps at him the next time they meet. The cartel continues to push their drugs Spank like crazy, and Kenji wants to bring the situation under control. Claude has to go back on the streets and this time kill some pushers of the Colombian cartel. Claude decides to stay away from Kenji for a while after this mission, but he still continues to live a dangerous life by helping Ray with several jobs. It's during this time that he also meets Donald Love, a businessman with a huge influence. After doing a few jobs for him, Donald reveals his grand plan. He wants to buy some real estate, but only after the prices have fallen. To manipulate the prices of the real estate market in the city, Donald wants to start a gang war. He instructs Claude to steal a cartel car and kill Kenji. The Yakuza will assume that the cartel is responsible for the attack, and they will want to retaliate. This will start a war between the two parties, and Donald will benefit from it. Claude does what he has to do and then embarks on his next mission for Donald, which is to collect a few packages a light aircraft will drop for him in the sea. However, Donald later reveals that these packages have only been a decoy. The package he is the most interested in is located on the plane. Claude drives to the designated location to find the parked plane, but he realizes that the package has already been stolen by the cartel. He drives to a construction site looking for the package and has to deal with several cartel members. He also stumbles on Catalina and her new boyfriend Miguel, who is carrying the package. Claude holds them at gunpoint, but Catalina creates a distraction by shooting Miguel and runs away. While Miguel pleads for his life, Oscar appears on site. She believes that the cartel is responsible for her brother's death, when in reality, it is Claude, and therefore she wants to torture Miguel in order to extract information from him. Things work out well for Claude in the end, who just takes the package and leaves. The businessman is impressed by Claude and now trusts him with a new mission to deliver an important package to one of his friends. Claude is successful again, but now the CIA is trying to seize Donald's package and arrest his friend. The businessman wants Claude to act as a decoy so he can buy his friend time to escape with the package. Once more, Claude does it, but he is faced with a surprise when he returns to Donald's mansion. The businessman has completely disappeared. After this, Claude meets with Ray one last time. Ray is a marked man, and the CIA is getting closer to arresting him, so he wants to leave the city. After Ray is gone, Claude stays away from the big players for a while, but considering he has earned fame around the streets, a few gang leaders trust him with several smaller jobs. A few days later, Claude meets with Oscar and finds her beating Miguel up. She informs Claude that Catalina is afraid of him, so she established 3 death squads around the city whose sole purpose is to find Claude and kill him. Oscar instructs Claude to act as bait and bring those death squads to a certain location, where her men will be waiting for them. Claude can't back down from such a challenge and carries out the plan. The death squads are ambushed and destroyed by the Yakuza. In the meantime, Oscar has extracted some new information from Miguel. The cartel is using some coffee stands as fronts to sell Spank. Oscar wants Claude to destroy all of those coffee stands in order to weaken the cartel. However, even that's not enough for her, and she wants to damage them further. She informs Claude that there's a plane arriving tonight carrying more Spank for Catalina. Claude drives to the airport and uses his sniper rifle to take out some cartel members. As he realizes that the plane is getting closer, he drives near the runway and eliminates the remaining guards. Finally, he sees the plane arriving and uses an RPG to destroy it. He collects the Spank that is not burned and drives away before the police can arrest him for the chaos he created. When he goes back to the construction site, Claude finds Oscar and Miguel dead. He also finds a letter from Catalina asking him to pay $500,000 as ransom if he wants to get Maria back. Claude decides to gather the money and visits Catalina's location. Once Catalina sees him, she wonders if he is here because he wants to save Maria or get her back. To satisfy her big ego, Catalina tells him that she would never be with him and that dating him back in the day was just business. Catalina requires to see the money, and once she sees it, she proclaims that Claude should have learned his lesson and know by now that she is not to be trusted. Catalina orders her men to kill Claude while she runs away with the money, but Claude manages to escape and get into his car. He sees Catalina trying to escape in a helicopter and is determined to get her. Soon, Claude arrives at the location where the helicopter lands. Catalina has an army of cartel soldiers guarding the place, but Claude is experienced and kills them all. Eventually, Catalina ditches Maria and tries to escape by mounting the helicopter, but Claude uses an RPG to hit it a couple of times until it explodes and crashes. Being the only 2 people left standing, Claude takes Maria away while she tells him that she loves him because he is a strong man. As they walk away, Maria keeps complaining about this negative experience and how the kidnapping ruined her hair. Suddenly, she is silenced by a gunshot. The ending of this game is probably the most controversial one out of all GTA games. Even to this day, we don't exactly know what happened here. The 2 theories you'll often come across is that Claude either shot in the air to shut her up, or that he killed her. The people claiming that Claude killed her will usually say that Claude just wanted to get back at Catalina the whole time, and Maria just happened to be there. He remembered how Maria also betrayed her husband, Salvatore, earlier in the game and didn't want it to happen to him. I guess it's up to you to decide which ending you want. GTA 4, 2008. In 2008, Niko Bellic, an Eastern European war veteran and former human trafficker, arrives in Liberty City aboard a cargo ship for multiple reasons: to avoid an old rival, find the man who sold out his unit during the war, and reunite with his cousin, Roman Bellic, who invited him to come to the city in the first place. Roman told Niko he was living a life full of riches, surrounded by beautiful women and sports cars. However, as soon as Niko arrived and met with Roman, he quickly discovered that all of his cousin's stories were lies. In reality, Roman lives in a heavily cramped apartment and runs a small taxi service. Niko begins working for Roman's company, soon meeting his girlfriend Mallory, who introduces him to her friend Michelle, whom he quickly begins to date. Niko also discovers that Roman is heavily in debt and has problems with loan sharks. He protects him on several occasions, eventually killing Bladar Marina, the head of the Albanian mob. Continuing working for his cousin, Niko soon meets Little Jacob, the underboss of the Yardies, a local gang and a good friend of Roman's. He helps in dealing with several rival drug dealers, with the pair soon becoming good friends. It is also Jacob that Nico obtains his first weapon from. Nico later meets Vlad Glebov, Roman's Russian loan shark, who gives him several debt-collecting jobs to keep Roman from sinking into debt. Later, Nico learns that Vlad had slept with Mallory and executes him. Nico reveals to Roman his real quest in Liberty City, to find and kill the man who betrayed his old war unit. Shortly after, the two are kidnapped by Faustin and Dmitri, the leaders of the Russian mafia and Broker and Vlad's superiors. Faustin is shown to be an absolute hothead, but is not bothered by Vlad's murder and ends up releasing the pair and employing Nico for several jobs. During his work for Faustin, Nico is introduced by Roman to his friend Brucey Kibitz. He performs several jobs for Brucey as well, along with some car thefts, obviously. Most of Nico's jobs for Faustin involve attacks against Kenny Petrovich, Liberty City's most powerful mobster. After Petrovich threatens to retaliate, Nico meets with Dmitri privately, who explains that he needs to kill Faustin to make amends with Petrovich. Out of options, Nico assassinates Faustin after being promised to be paid for the hit by Dmitri. However, when Nico meets Dmitri at a warehouse to collect his money, Dmitri betrays him and sells him out to his friend and fellow Russian crime lord, Ray Bulgarin. We learn that Ray is Nico's former employer and the man that he came to Liberty City to escape from. Nico somehow manages to escape the ambush with little Jacob's help, but Dmitri's men soon burn down both Roman's taxi service and apartments in retaliation. After losing everything, Nico and Roman move to Bohan, where Nico begins working for Manny Escuela, a vigilante who's dedicated to cleaning up the streets in Bohan, and Elizabeta Torres, a Puerto Rican drug baroness. Working for Torres, Nico makes new criminal connections, including Irish gangster Patrick McGreary and drug dealer Playboy X. Nico soon begins taking on jobs from Playboy and gets introduced to his mentor, Dwayne, who was recently released from prison. Nico helps Dwayne rebuild his life, quickly forming a bond with him over their tragic past. However, tensions between Playboy and Dwayne begin to rise, and both men eventually ask Nico to kill each other, leaving the player with two possibilities. Should you choose to kill Dwayne, Playboy pays you for the hit, regretting that he hired Nico to kill his mentor. Should you choose to kill Playboy, Nico becomes good friends with Dwayne, who lets him stay in Playboy's penthouse. Soon after, Nico receives an angry call from Elizabeta, who tells him that little Jacob sold some of her cocaine to the Angels of Death, and they had ripped both of them off. Nico successfully retrieves the drugs, but when he goes to give them to Jacob, he is surprised to find Michelle, who reveals herself as an undercover government agent actually named Karen, and brings him before her agency, known only by its cover, United Liberty Paper. Nico is entrapped into working for the agency and is tasked with killing several known or suspected terrorists. In return, the agency clears his criminal record and promises to help him track down the traitor of his old war squad. Roman suddenly disappears, and Mallory informs Nico that he has been kidnapped by Dmitri's men. Nico is able to save his cousin, with his hatred for Dmitri only intensifying. Later, Roman's fortunes suddenly improve when he receives a large amount of money from an insurance claim he made on his destroyed business. Using the money, Roman buys himself and Nico an apartment in Algonquin, then restarts his taxi company. Nico soon begins working for Patrick McGreary, one of the criminals he met before, as he is blackmailed into helping a corrupt cop, Francis, by killing several people who possess incriminating evidence against him. He also assists Patrick on several robberies, most notably that of the Bank of Liberty. Nico starts working for the rest of the McGreary brothers, namely a retired mobster, Derek, and the leader of the Irish mob, Gerald. During this time, Nico befriends Patrick and develops a relationship with his sister, Kate. Francis soon learns that Derek is returned from Ireland and, fearing that he might rat him out, hires Nico to assassinate him. However, Derek then calls Nico to tell him that he suspects Francis is trying to kill him and asks Nico to protect him. This once again leaves Nico with two possible options: kill Francis or kill Derek. Based on Nico's choice here, he attends the funeral of the guy he chooses to kill. Through Patrick, Nico soon meets a high-ranking Italian mobster, Ray Bacino, who employs him to assist him with a major diamond dealing scheme. After collecting the diamonds, Nico gets betrayed by Ray's associates, so he has to chase them down and kill them. In order to thank Nico for completing the job, Ray helps him track down Florian Kravik, one of the two survivors of his old squad. Nico and Roman confront Florian, who changed his name to Bernie Crane. They discover that he is not the traitor, meaning that the one who betrayed the squad can only be the other known survivor, Darko Breivik. The United Liberty paper introduces Nico to John Gravelli, the elderly and dying Don of the Gambetti crime family, the most powerful of the 5 Italian mafia families. After completing several jobs for Gravelli, the old Don promises to help Nico track down Darko Breivik. Nico soon meets yet another crime family boss, Jimmy Pecorino, who, as usual, hires Nico to do several jobs for him. Eventually, United Liberty paper track down Darko Breivik and bring him to the cargo bay. Nico, accompanied by Roman, finds Darko and, after an intense confrontation, is given the choice of either killing him, which leads to Nico feeling empty, or sparing and letting him run away, which will cause Nico to feel better. Pecorino calls Nico and asks him to conduct a heroin deal with Dimitri, which Pecorino will pay Nico $250,000 for. Nico, however, is reluctant to do so because of the animosity between him and Dimitri. After Pecorino leaves, Nico phones Roman and Kate. Roman encourages Nico to conduct the deal, claiming Dimitri has changed and that Roman can use the money to take himself and Nico on a holiday. Kate, however, urges Nico not to do the deal, claiming that he should not sacrifice his principles for money or take his chances with Dimitri. After this phone call, Nico needs to make one final choice, and depending on what you choose, you'll get one of 2 possible endings: deal or revenge. Since the revenge ending is theorized to be the canon one, we will be going with that one in this video. In this ending, Nico betrays Pecorino and confronts Dimitri alone on a ship. After infiltrating the ship, Nico kills Dimitri's guards and injures Dimitri. Dimitri tells Nico that killing him is a big mistake, but he ignores this threat and finishes him off. He then leaves the ship and calls Roman to inform him that Dimitri has been taken care of. Roman expresses his disappointment at not getting the money, but appreciates that Dimitri will not bother them any longer. On the morning of Roman and Mallory's wedding, Nico phones Kate and tells her that he cut his ties with Dimitri. Kate congratulates Nico for this, and the two attend the wedding. During the drive, Nico expresses his desire to leave his criminal lifestyle behind, and that he also wants to get to know Kate better. The two arrive at the church and witness Roman and Mallory get married. However, during the celebrations outside, a black car drives past and an enraged Pecorino fires at the crowd, whilst calling Nico a double-crossing betrayer. After the car drives off, it is revealed that Kate was killed during the chaos. Roman tells Nico not to blame himself, promising that he and little Jacob will find Pecorino. The following day, Nico, Jacob, and Roman chase some of Pecorino's men through the city to an abandoned casino. Nico tells Jacob to lead Roman to safety before finding his way through the casino and chasing Pecorino out of the building. Outside, Pecorino boards a speedboat and attempts to escape. Nico tries to follow him on a bike, but is picked up by Roman and Jacob's helicopter. After a brief chase, both Pecorino's speedboat and the helicopter break down, with both parties ending up on Happiness Island. Nico chases down and finally kills Pecorino as revenge for Kate's murder. Roman and Jacob tell Nico that it is over and he has won. Now, there are 2 DLCs for GTA 4, and they both take place at the exact same time as the original story. They feature many of the same characters and help us see the events of the game from different angles. The first one is Lost and Damned. This DLC follows Johnny Klebitz, vice president of the gang Lost Motorcycle Club. He's been busy protecting the gang's business interests in Liberty City, while the president of the gang, Billy Gray, was in rehab for drug addiction. When Billy returns, his violent actions towards the gang's rivals, the Angels of Death, cause a previously established truce to be broken between the 2 gangs. Johnny, along with Jim Fitzgerald, is working hard to sabotage their rivals' business, which includes stealing their bikes to be sold for parts and blowing up their vans with pipe bombs. To further complicate matters, Jason Michaels, a recently patched-in member of the motorcycle club, is killed during one of the attacks on the Angels of Death. In retaliation, the gang attacks the Angels of Death clubhouse and secures a large amount of drugs. Billy then introduces Johnny to Thomas Stubbs III, a corrupt congressman who pays Johnny to help him stay on top politically. Eventually, the gang learns that the drugs they stole from the Angels were originally stolen from the Triads, so they try to sell them back to them. However, they are betrayed in the process, and Billy, the president of the motorcycle club, is sent to prison, which now makes Johnny the leader. However, Brian Jeremy, the club secretary, refuses to follow, having been fiercely loyal to Billy and blaming Johnny for his arrest. This is why Brian attempts to ambush Johnny on the docks, sending members of his rebel faction after him. This eventually leads to Johnny surviving the ambush and defeating Brian, which gives the player a choice to either save or kill him. Soon, Johnny is forced to help his ex-girlfriend Ashley by kidnapping Roman Bellic at the behest of Dimitri, to whom Ashley owes money. Johnny eventually comes to help out the Pecorino family, and through them, he steals a large amount of diamonds from Tony Prince and attempts to sell them to the Jewish mafia with the help of Nico. Remember this Tony guy, he'll be important later. Anyway, the deal fails after one of the Jewish mobsters is gunned down by a sniper who steals the diamonds. But Johnny manages to escape with the money. Afterward, he deals with some of Bacino's henchmen, planning to keep the money for himself. Angered by this, Bacino kidnaps Jim, one of Johnny's friends, and tortures him while holding Johnny at gunpoint. But the two eventually manage to escape. Johnny fights off several hitmen working for Bacino and ultimately learns that Jim was killed by one of Bacino's men. Johnny is furious about this and plans to kill Bacino in retaliation, but eventually decides not to, as Bacino will either be dead or in prison within a month anyway. However, Johnny now has another problem. Billy, his former boss, who is now in prison, has agreed to testify against Johnny so that he may be freed. Johnny and the other members of his gang infiltrate the prison, and Johnny personally executes Billy. Afterwards, the remnants of the gang burn the clubhouse down and stand in front of the burning building, contemplating the future. The second DLC for GTA 4 takes place roughly at the same time as this one, and is called The Ballad of Gay Tony. This DLC starts with Luis Fernando Lopez being held hostage at the Bank of Liberty during a robbery involving Nico Bellic. After the robbery is done, Luis goes to meet his friend Anthony Prince, also known as Gay Tony, an entrepreneur who runs a couple of clubs in the area. While there, Rocco Pelosi, a senior mobster, and his accomplice Vince enter the loft and collect Tony's club income for the week as interest repayment on an outstanding loan. In an attempt to curry favor with Rocco, Tony and Luis go to Chinatown to negotiate a deal with a senior triad. Though these negotiations soon turn awry, and Luis protects Tony as they escape Chinatown. Tony is headed in a downward spiral due to substance abuse, supplied by his boyfriend Evan Moss. Luis, Tony, and Evan soon head to the docks to buy $2 million worth of diamonds from a cook coming in on a tanker. During the exchange, members of the Lost Motorcycle Club led by Johnny attack and kill Evan to acquire the diamonds. Tony and Luis later meet with Ray Bulgarin and his associate Timur, who offers Luis some work in exchange for financial help. Soon after, Gracie Ancelotti, Tony's friend and a daughter of Ancelotti's crime family, gets kidnapped by unknown assailants. The Ancelottis establish that Gracie has been kidnapped because of the diamonds and are blaming Tony and Luis for it. Tony soon learns where the diamonds are being exchanged and sends Luis to retrieve them. Luis ambushes the exchange and succeeds in getting back the diamonds. Bulgarin soon phones Luis, telling him to go to a nearby rooftop where he finds the severed head of the cook who was selling the diamonds initially. Bulgarin then reveals that the diamonds are actually his and that the cook stole them from him. While on the roof, Luis also gets ambushed by Bulgarin's men, but manages to escape alive. Gracie's father, Giovanni Ancelotti, then orders Luis and Tony to trade the diamonds with the kidnappers and get Gracie back. At the exchange, it is revealed that the ones who kidnapped Gracie are none other than Nico and Patrick. However, before the exchange can be done, Bulgarin shows up and orders his men to shoot Nico and Patrick. Bulgarin eventually flees the scene, and amidst the chaos, the diamonds fall into a dump truck heading in the opposite direction. Luis, Tony, and Gracie escape on a speedboat. After this ordeal, Luis meets Rocco and Vince, who explain to him that he must kill Tony, or the Ancelottis and Russians will team up and kill Tony, Luis, and all of their friends and family. Luis shows up at one of Tony's clubs and contemplates shooting him, before pointing the gun at Vince and shooting him instead. The Russians show up, resulting in a huge gunfight within the club. Tony blames Luis for everything and flees to his apartment to pack and move to the desert. Luis convinces Tony that he chose not to kill him because it is them against the world, and they need to resolve their situation. He then ventures to an island to ambush a Russian heroin exchange, where he kills Timur and learns that Bulgarin is fleeing the city by plane in 2 hours. He speeds to the airport and manages to board Bulgarin's plane and kill all of the henchmen on board. A vengeful Bulgarian emerges from the cockpit holding a grenade, threatening to blow the entire plane up if Luis kills him. Luis takes the risk and shoots Bulgarian, who drops the grenade, triggering an explosion that destroys the plane. Luis manages to parachute out of the burning wreckage to safety and heads to a park where Tony is waiting. Once there, the two agree to keep running the nightclubs as a family business. And as for the diamonds, they, in the end, are found by a homeless man. GTA Chinatown Wars, 2009. This game starts with a plane ominously gliding over a stretch of ocean as a man stares into the window, contemplating his father's recent demise. This man's father was a prominent crime boss who was struck down, and his son is ready to avenge him. With the family heirloom in hand, a sword called Yujian, the man is heading towards Liberty City to meet his uncle, Kenny, the new patriarch of the family. As soon as the plane lands, another man drives up to the runway towards it and asks our protagonist, Huang Li, to get in the car his uncle sent for him. Unfortunately, their meeting gets cut short by a sudden ambush. With his escort now dead, Huang passes out when a bullet grazes the side of his head and gets kidnapped by his ambushers immediately after. Believing him to be dead, even though he was only pretending, the assailants dumped the car with Huang's body by driving it into a river. Luckily enough, Huang immediately escapes the car by breaking a window and swims back to the shore. After stealing a car parked at the docks, Huang drives all the way to his uncle's restaurant. Although Huang was still alive and well despite the rumors of his death, he somehow lost the Yujian during his encounter with the kidnappers. This fact enraged Uncle Kenny, since he had promised the legendary sword to the leader of the Triads, Sin. Considering he now had no tribute to pay to his leader, Uncle Kenny was clearly disappointed and worried about the status of his position within the criminal organization. Exhausted from everything that transpired earlier, Huang is sent to an apartment to rest and recover. The next day, Uncle Kenny lets Huang know that losing the Yujian was a huge problem, and that Sin was looking to punish his subordinate for not presenting it to him. Although the consequences seemed dire, Uncle Kenny ordered Huang to bring back information from a couple spies while he dealt with the sword situation. When Huang got there, all he found was one spy left at the scene, Ling Shan. According to her, the police decided to jump the rest of her buddies and even wound up tracking her down to Huang's car. After getting chased by the cops, Ling drops Huang back home and takes the car back to Uncle Kenny's. Unfortunately for Uncle Kenny, not being able to produce the sword completely decimated his chances of being a potential heir to the crime empire. Now, with his status within the Triads under question, Uncle Kenny needs Huang to take care of his business, hence he recommends a visit to the weapons shop and some training. His trainer turns out to be Ling, a spy he met before, and she teaches him hand-to-hand combat and how to shoot a gun. Soon after, Huang's skills were put to the test against some gangsters invading Uncle Kenny's turf, which led to Ling getting shot and dying as a result. Unaffected by the death of one of his subordinates, Uncle Kenny tries to convey to Huang that getting attacked by a bunch of nameless individuals is a bad sign for his influence within the city. Uncle Kenny then orders Huang to go and deal with these small-time gangsters at their hideouts in order to avenge Ling's death and assert the Triad's dominance. After killing off all the gang members, Huang returns to his uncle. The pair talk about Uncle Kenny being offered a chance to work under Sin's son, Chan Jiaoming. Clearly dissatisfied with the prospect of working under a child like Chan, Uncle Kenny decided to delegate his responsibilities to Huang instead. These responsibilities include pretty much doing anything Chan wishes for, like stealing cars for him purely on a whim. Huang's also tasked with selling his uncle's drugs, burning down stores that refuse to pay for protection, and recruiting more Triads. Whilst hanging out with Chan, Huang gets told to rig one of his competitors' car in the street race. This is done in order to ensure that Chan wins the favor of the Tongs, who are the ruling committee for the Triads. As if rigging one of his main competitor's rides wasn't enough to assure him a victory, Chan orders Huang to make sure he pushes every vehicle off the road during the race, too. In the end, with Huang's help, Chan finally wins the race, and Huang wins Chan's favor. A few days after the race, one of Chan's goons informs Huang that he's been abducted and that they must hurry if they want to save him. A couple oil tankers get lit on fire by the perpetrators after they left Chan to die within a car parked next to them. Thankfully, Huang uses a fire truck hose to extinguish the fire and save his boss. Even though Huang saved Chan's life, he gets the blame for causing this incident because he merely followed his boss's orders during the big race. Clearly annoyed by Chan's ungrateful behavior and moronic demeanor, Huang decides to give Chan's opposition a shot and organizes a meeting with the street thug named Zhu. According to Zhu, while Chan's busy acting like an idiot, he wants to restore the Triad's sphere of influence and power. Huang's first order of business with Zhu is to get onto the back of a moving truck and throw away valuables in order for Zhu to catch them. Huang was also ordered to sabotage Sin's chances at maintaining his influence within the family by stealing Sin's drugs and foiling his plans to assert dominance within Triad turf. Meanwhile, Uncle Kenny was looking for a new warehouse to purchase, and Huang helps him get it with his own money. During the purchase, Uncle Kenny also lets Huang know of a lead regarding the location of the legendary sword he lost. Unfortunately, that wild goose chase doesn't lead anywhere. Not long after, Chan pulls Huang into an ambush because he was trying to broker peace with a rival gang in order to impress the Tongs. Later on in the evening, Huang gets paid a visit by an undercover cop named Wade Heston, who is also looking for the legendary sword and the people who killed Huang's father. After backing up Chan and putting up with his stupid schemes for so long, Huang finally earns the chance to interact with the Triad's leader, Sin, face to face. Unfortunately for Huang, Chan took all the credit for his work and pinned the blame on him instead. Despite that, Sin entrusts Huang with the task to go and blow up the ambushers' hideout. With a stolen oil tanker, Huang completely wipes out the entire gang. A little while after that, Huang gets called in to casually meet up with the undercover detective again, who came back with some leads. According to him, the Korean members of a gang called the Midtown Gangsters might be responsible for killing his father and stealing the sword. Eventually, Huang teams up with Zhu to light Korean businesses on fire because they refuse to pay for Triad protection. Not only that, they also managed to use the commotion to keep increasing their influence within the Asian communities around the city. Unfortunately for them, the feds eventually conduct a raid on the Triad's operations, and they wind up arresting Chan during one of their raids. According to Uncle Kenny, someone within the family is leaking information, and it's time Huang meets Sin to find out what he should do next. Sin's first order to Huang is to make sure his men successfully smuggle laundered money out of the country, while he spends that time trying to investigate who the rat is within the Triads. Upon his return, Huang gets confronted by Sin, who tells him that his son got released on bail and that it was one of Chan's trusted men who was leaking the information to the cops. With the witness identified, Huang is tasked with assassinating him. However, despite getting rid of the rat, according to Chan, the feds still have an insider who's actively selling the Triads out. Growing incredibly impatient with his dad Sin's slow pace regarding announcing an heir, Chan tells Huang that he wants to take matters into his own hands. Following this, Huang finishes a couple of tasks for Chan and Zhu before meeting Heston again. Heston informs Huang of a secret group within the Koreans named Wansu no Dong that may be responsible for all the recent troubles the Triads have been through. Eventually, Sin calls in Huang to effectively eliminate every single defector and traitor he's managed to identify within the Triads by now. After killing all of the suspects, Huang meets Sin at the amusement park and gets confronted as a result. Since things started going south for the Triads as soon as Huang came into the picture, Sin suspects Huang is the rat. Seeing that things could quickly get out of control, Uncle Kenny vouches for Huang and begs Sin to give his nephew another chance to secure the sword and find his father's assassins. Despite the lack of trust, Sin agrees and delegates Huang with duties to investigate two former Triad allies, the Angels of Death and the Midtown Gangsters. Posing as Detective Lester, who wants to become a member of the Angels of Death, Huang effectively helps the Triads gain important information on the gang's inner workings. Not only that, Huang also helps track down the Midtown Gangsters' hidden safe house as well. Determined to find out who the rat really is, Sin sends Huang to the Korean safe house in order to retrieve their files. After pulling off a successful raid, the retrieved files don't mention Huang's name anywhere within them. In fact, the only mention within the files is a giant drug deal about to go down in Liberty City. After crippling both the Midtown Gangsters and the Angel of Death gangs with his activities, Huang inevitably helps clear both parties of any wrongdoing. Meeting up with Heston again, Huang winds up hacking into the police data servers and recovers an encrypted file with detailed information on who the rat really is. According to Heston, the informants were actually two people, Zhu and Chan. Before wasting any more time, Huang meets his Uncle Kenny at the local museum and informs him about the traitors. The pair rush over to Sin's place and confront him with the information regarding his son and Zhu. Upon hearing the news, Sin immediately resigns from his position as leader of the Triads and asks Uncle Kenny to be his replacement. Following this interaction, Huang follows the Triads protocol and wipes out all of Chan and Zhu's goons along with them, despite their constant pleas for mercy. However, just as it seemed that everything was finally over, Heston contacts Huang again and gives him the bad news. As it turns out, the file they recovered from the servers was fake, and both Chan and Zhu were innocent all along. In an effort to finally make a name for himself by making a big bust, Heston puts his all into making sure Huang finally finds the person responsible for all of this chaos. With information at hand regarding the meeting between Heston's FIB friend and the assassin, the pair rushes to the meeting only to find that the real rat was none other than Uncle Kenny this whole time. After tailing Uncle Kenny across the city, Heston and Huang wind up all the way to Sin's house. Inside, Sin gets confronted by Uncle Kenny over the murder of Huang's father. While both of them were blaming each other, Uncle Kenny uses the Yujian to murder Sin right in front of Heston and Huang. Following this, a struggle breaks out between uncle and nephew, and in the end, Huang finally gets revenge for his father by killing his assassin, Kenny. Suddenly, the cops break into the compound and arrest everyone except Huang under orders from Detective Heston. With Sin's blessings to lead the Triads into the future, the game ends with Huang roaming the streets as a free man. GTA 5, 2013. GTA 5 starts with a prologue mission set in 2004, 9 years before the main story begins. Michael and 3 of his mates have entered a bank in Ludendorff, and they are in the midst of an armed robbery. Even though the operation doesn't unfold smoothly in its entirety, Michael and his group manage to steal $200,000 and drive away. However, their driver ends up getting killed due to shots exchanged with the police, and Michael has to take over and drive the group to safety. Things continue to get worse as the helicopter they have planned for is not in position. A member of the group, Brad, is shot first, followed by Michael. As Michael lies on the ground, afraid of bleeding out, he tells the last member of the group, Trevor, to run away. A few days later, Michael is supposedly buried, but is somehow still alive and watches his own funeral. We later learn that this was all planned by Michael, who wanted to leave his criminal life behind. In order to do that, he worked together with a corrupt FIB agent, Dave Norton, in order to fake his death and assume a new identity. This went smoothly, with Michael moving to Los Santos and changing his last name from Townley to DeSanta. 9 years later, in 2013, Michael attends therapy and recalls all of his past mistakes, laying it out on his therapist. After leaving the therapist's office, Michael's path crosses with 2 men named Franklin and Lamar. We learn that Franklin is looking for the house of a rich man. As it appears, he has had the right intel as he sees 2 expensive cars parked right outside the house. He and Lamar steal the cars and deliver them to a garage to be sold by Simeon, a man they work with. Franklin is tired of this life and would love to get out of it, but he has no other choice for the time being. Soon, Simeon needs his services again and sends him to steal a motorcycle. However, things go terribly wrong, and Franklin has to kill a couple of people standing in his way. Despite this, Franklin's next mission is even crazier, as Simeon has him repossess a car that belongs to Michael's son. Although Franklin steals the car, Michael emerges from the back seat and holds a gun to his head. Michael orders Franklin to drive right through the windows of Simeon's car dealership, and the young man does exactly as he is told. Then, Michael tells Franklin to run away and serves Simeon a good beating, warning him not to make him come here again. One day later, Franklin visits Michael at his house looking for work, but Michael advises him to find a way to get out of this life. All of a sudden, Michael is notified that his son, James, tried to sell their yacht, but it is now being stolen by the people who pretended that they wanted to buy it. Michael takes Franklin along for some help and they manage to save James, even though they lose the yacht. Michael starts trusting Franklin and asks him to fix his car and bring it back to his house along with James. When Michael returns home, he finds his wife sleeping with her tennis coach. He gets very angry about it and takes Franklin along to find the coach. When they find him, they see him hiding in a beautiful mansion, but they comment on how he would never have the money to build a place like that. Michael and Franklin literally take the place down, but when they get back to Michael's place, they are visited by a man called Martin Madrazo, the person whom the mansion actually belonged to. Franklin knows the man and is very careful with his words about him, presenting the drug lord as a legitimate businessman who has been wrongfully accused in the past. Madrazo wants to have his mansion rebuilt and tells Michael that he expects to get $2.5 million from him if he wants to stay alive. Knowing that things can get messy for him, Michael is forced back into his old life, as that's the only way he knows how to make money. Michael knows he's going to need some help and gets in touch with an old friend named Lester. Lester is a hacker, and he agrees to help Michael if the latter helps him with a few jobs in return. In the meantime, Franklin tries to come up with ways to make money, but he is also busy trying to stay alive, as he and Lamar are ambushed by a gang led by a guy named Stretch. As the days go by, Michael tries to bond with his son. During a bike ride, James reveals to him that his sister is trying to get connected with some people who shoot adult films, and points him to a boat where everything is happening. Michael is infuriated and proceeds to take his daughter away from that boat, which leads to him growing even more distant from his family. Soon, Michael meets with Lester again and asks him if he has found a place they can rob. Lester has some big plans and wants them to rob the Union Depository, a place that has never been robbed before. However, Michael believes the risk is huge, so they decide to focus on a jewelry store instead. Michael gets to work and scouts the place to find out where the cameras are located and what's their level of security. In addition, he has to put a crew together for the operation. Lester reminds him that he has to be careful with the people he'll pick because officially, he's supposed to be dead. The first person Michael calls is Franklin, who agrees to join the operation even though the pay is not very good. When it's time for the actual operation, Franklin fills the store with sleeping gas through the ventilation system, and everybody is put to sleep. Michael and the rest of the crew steal as much as they can, and the operation is deemed successful. Later, Franklin goes to Michael's house to celebrate, but he is not the only person to visit. Dave Norton, a corrupt FIB agent that helped Michael disappear, has made the connection between this robbery and Michael, and scolds him about it because nobody should know he's still alive. Dave is worried that Trevor, Michael's old partner from 9 years ago, will find that he's still alive. We cut to Trevor, who watches the incident on the news and has realized what's going on. He hears the security guard talking about a certain line Michael told him, which was, "You forget 1,000 things every day, make sure this is one of them," which is the exact same line Michael told a guard during the bank heist 9 years ago. While Trevor is trying to process the possibility of Michael being alive, Johnny Klebitz, a protagonist from GTA 4, Lost and Damned, suddenly appears in front of his trailer. Johnny yells at Trevor for hooking up with his girlfriend, Ashley, but Trevor doesn't pay much attention to it, as he's still confused about what he saw on TV. However, after Johnny continues pushing him, Trevor suddenly snaps and beats him to a pulp, killing him on the spot. Well, this scene definitely angered a lot of GTA 4 fans. Anyways, after this, Trevor acts fast by sending one of his guys to Los Santos to find Michael. At the same time, he tries to grow his own illegal business by connecting with some Chinese criminals, Tao Chang, and his translator. Unfortunately for him, the Chinese decide to work with another organization, the O'Neill brothers. Trevor showcases his short temper by beating the Chinese up and then blowing up the drug lab of the brothers. A day later, Trevor travels to Los Santos and crashes Michael's house. Michael tries to explain everything to Trevor, but the conversation is interrupted by James, who informs his father that his sister Tracy is auditioning for a talent show. Trevor motivates Michael to go find Tracy before she humiliates herself. The two of them do exactly that, and they also hunt down the show's producer, make him drop his pants, and shoot a humiliating video of him. A couple of days later, Dave wants to meet with Michael to discuss their common problems. He believes that since their lives are intertwined, Michael should help him with a few jobs. Michael is out of options, so he helps Dave with some of his career problems. As the situation spins out of control, Michael meets with Franklin and warns him to leave the city. On the other hand, Franklin doesn't want to abandon Michael and reassures him that he's going to stand by his side. Soon enough, Michael meets a guy named Steve Haynes, who is Dave's superior at FIB. The agents want Michael to retrieve a man who is under questioning at another federal agency. Michael puts his team together and Franklin meets Trevor for the first time. When they get ready to jump into action, Trevor gives Michael a lift to the agency with a helicopter. Michael bursts into the agency's offices through the window and tries to retrieve his targets, while Franklin provides cover for him with a sniper rifle. The three of them work well together and eventually complete the assignment. Dave communicates with Michael again, as he now needs further assistance. Michael takes Trevor along and they meet with Dave and Steve at a warehouse. The agents have the man they retrieved, Ferdinand, tied up on a chair and they prepare him for an interrogation. As it appears, Ferdinand is a spy and Steve wants to get a name out of him. Trevor makes Ferdinand's life miserable until he gives them a name. Dave and Michael drive to the designated location and they wait patiently until the man they are looking for appears. Michael uses a sniper rifle to kill the man, while Steve instructs Trevor to kill Ferdinand. Trevor doesn't like to be told what to do, so he decides to drop Ferdinand at the airport alive. With everything that's been happening lately, and after being abandoned by his whole family, Michael feels the need to have a talk with his therapist. He spills his heart out, but therapy seems to be doing nothing for him, as the doctor is only interested in getting paid. After leaving his therapy session, Michael gathers Trevor and Franklin again for yet another mission given to them by Steve. This time, they will need to intercept an armored truck and steal the money they find in it. Trevor takes the high ground while Michael and Franklin use a big truck to hit the armored truck and turn it over. Then, Franklin uses a sticky bomb to open its door on the back and steal the goodies. The police swarm the location, but Franklin does a good job of holding them back. At the same time, Trevor uses his sniper rifle to provide cover for his mates until a police helicopter joins the scene and he has to take it out with an RPG. Michael proceeds to deliver a stolen package to a man named Devin Weston, who is a close friend of Steve. Devin wants to work with Michael and his crew because he thinks they are pros, but Michael has too much on his plate already. Despite this, Devin manages to convince him when he says that he can introduce him to a movie producer that Michael admires, a man named Solomon Richards. Michael can't turn this offer down and meets with Richards, who asks him for a few favors as some of his associates refuse to take part in the latest movie he's preparing. Michael does what he does best and roughs everyone up until they agree to help Solomon with the movie. After completing more jobs, Michael is finally able to pay Madrazo for destroying his mansion, but the latter wants Michael to help him with one last job. His cousin is trying to fly to Liberty City to testify against him, and therefore Madrazo wants him dead. Michael and Trevor spot the plane, shoot it down, and steal some files they are supposed to deliver back to Madrazo. However, things go sideways when Madrazo refuses to pay Trevor the amount of money he asks for the job. Their heated argument ends with Trevor kidnapping Madrazo's wife. Michael knows that they are in big trouble now, so he leaves the city along with Trevor and Madrazo's wife in order to lay low for a little while. On the other hand, the FIB agents won't leave them alone because they want them to do yet another job. This time, they have to find $2 million to buy a helicopter in order to use it to steal some nerve gas from a group of terrorists. Michael puts the team together again, and Lester finds a new bank for them to rob. The operation goes smoothly, and Michael with his crew deliver the stolen money to Steve's man. Right next, Michael steals an expensive artifact hoping to make amends with Madrazo. But their settlement has to wait for a while because they still need to steal that nerve gas from terrorists. Lucky for them, they manage to steal the chemicals and make it out of the facility alive. In the meantime, Lester has talked to Madrazo, given him the artifact, and has reached a deal with the drug lord. Trevor also delivers Madrazo's wife back home, and both parties agree to never meet with each other again. As the team gets some well-deserved rest, they also decide to go after their wildest dream, to rob the Union Depository. After they do their surveillance work, Michael announces to Trevor that he's going to quit criminal life after the depository job, and he will become a movie producer. However, Trevor gets angry because this kind of life is what he likes. As the two of them talk, Trevor asks who got buried in Michael's place all those years ago, but he does not get a straight answer. He decides to drive to Michael's supposed grave, and he digs it up only to find that their old friend Brad is in the coffin. Trevor gets even angrier now because he thought Brad was locked up in a federal prison. Michael tries to calm him down, but their conversation ends up with both men pulling out their guns. However, none of them have the guts to pull the trigger. Eventually, they are interrupted by Chang's men who are looking for Trevor. In case you forgot, Chang is that Chinese guy Trevor beat up near the beginning of the game. Anyways, Trevor manages to escape while the armed Chinese immobilize Michael. When Trevor returns to Los Santos, he meets with Franklin, who's been informed by Lester that Michael was abducted. Franklin asks Trevor to help him save Michael, but the latter refuses to assist him. In fact, he wants Michael to die and says that he's going to kill him if the Chinese don't. In the meantime, Michael is being held by Chang's men, who realize that he is of no value to Trevor. Thus, they plan to kill him. Luckily for Michael, Franklin has tracked his phone and comes to his rescue, guns blazing. Michael manages to free himself and drives away with Franklin. Once they get to safety, Franklin requires to know the truth about Michael's past, and Michael explains everything to him. A few days later, Michael is cornered by the FIB agents, who ask him for yet another favor. Considering that these favors are getting out of control, Michael recruits Lester and Franklin to break into the FIB offices and delete all of the evidence the agency has on him so he can finally escape their grip. Unexpectedly, Michael is also visited by his son, who tells him that he loves him. Michael also proceeds to meet with his wife publicly, and she agrees to give him another chance. However, they have to take one step at a time and start by attending family therapy. Indeed, the family attends therapy, but the session goes terribly as Michael and his wife Amanda mostly blame everything on one another. However, as soon as they walk outside the therapist's office, they express how much they love each other, and Amanda asks Michael to take the family back home. Sometime later, the raid on FIB finally begins. Using a helicopter, Michael and Franklin parachute onto the FIB building and break in through the ceiling. After blowing the locked door to the servers, Michael boots a USB given to him by Lester and steals the files. Then, he and Franklin have to shoot their way out of the building. The boys take a few moments to celebrate their victory, but Michael is soon called for another meeting with Dave and Steve. Steve attempts to arrest the other two, but several other agencies get involved because they have identified Steve as a corrupt government official. The meeting soon spirals into total chaos, and Michael finds himself in yet another gunfight. He's soon pinned by a helicopter, but Trevor appears out of nowhere and takes the pilot out with his sniper rifle. With Trevor providing cover, Michael somehow manages to escape. The two old pals meet on the ground, and Trevor wants them to put their differences aside in order to proceed with their final job, the Union Depository. One night later, Steve and Dave approach Franklin because they want him to take Trevor out. Franklin obviously doesn't want to do that, but the agents gave him no other choice. In the meantime, an armed unit breaks into Michael's house, but he makes it back home right in time to save his family. This incident applies even more pressure on him, so Michael tells Lester they have to make their move on the depository and steal the money so he can get away with his family. Lester plans the operation, which unfolds quite well for the team, with them stealing a total of $200 million in gold. The next day, Franklin is visited by Devin Weston, who now asks him to kill Michael because he has done harm to his business. It's here that the last mission of GTA 5 starts. Franklin has three choices: listen to the feds and kill Trevor, listen to Devin and kill Michael, or warn both of them and face the consequences together. Although it was never 100% confirmed which ending is the canon one, the big majority of fans agree that the C ending, where everyone survives, is the true one, due to many subtle clues found in GTA Online universe. Therefore, the final mission starts with Franklin revealing everything to Michael and Trevor. The trio then decide to act collectively and get rid of their enemies once and for all. First, Trevor kills Steve Haynes with a sniper rifle. Then, Michael kills Stretch, a gang leader who used to be Franklin's enemy. Finally, the group kidnaps Devin, and they finish him by pushing him off a cliff in the trunk of a car. Eventually, the group decides to lay low and live normal lives as friends.